is episode 13 of OverSight. Oh, do you hear that, guys? It's episode 13, and Halloween's just around the corner, isn't it? So, you see, you probably thought we were just really lazy and didn't do any episodes of the show, but actually, I just really believe in, like, American tropes and themes for shows, and I really wanted the 13th episode, because that's really spooky to me, to take place around Halloween. So that's why I spaced out this show to barely get 13 episodes within a 1 year span. And I think we actually failed that. So, although obviously,
here's
to me,
the real question then.
Yeah,
what are you planning for the Thanksgiving episode then?
Well, you've made a classic mistake there, haven't you, Monty? Because I'm not American, so I don't give a fuck. I don't give thanks for anything, mate. I don't give thanks for your country.
That's what I was
thanks
thinking.
For the
That's
Indians.
fine. You got there to yourself for you.
Don't give thanks for anything, mate. And plus, here's the thing. To me, I actually don't find... I've never really... Here's the thing. I don't know if any of you feel like this, but I've actually never been like a very superstitious person in general, you know? So I've actually never really understood the whole thing about like Friday the 13th being creepy or the number 13 being creepy. I've never really understood it, right? But actually, if you ever look into it, the real reason why Friday the 13th is actually creepy is that actually came from where there was the Cathar uprising in like medieval France, which were these like Gnostic Christians. And basically what happened is the king of France like just owed them a load of money because they were involved with the Knights Templar, who were the first bankers in Europe. And he wanted to sort of just like get out of debt. So he basically just declared like a religious purge against these people. They surrounded this area they were in. They killed them all. And, you know, this like Knights Templar, like Grand Master or whatever, called Jacques de Molay, was actually like burned at the stake as part of this. And then it was all on Friday the 13th, basically. It was like, that was the first one. And so that's actually where the tale comes from as to why. That is actually a lot creepier than the idea that like, oh,
I
shit.
knew that had happened. Yeah. I didn't realize that's where...
That's way more creepy than the idea that like, you know, oh shit, I'm on the 13th floor of a hotel. Bloody hell, help, help. And then American hotels have to be like floor 12 to floor 40.
But see, Duncan, this just goes back to the fact that people just take all of these like creepy things, or, you know, they take all these tropes for granted, but when you actually go back and understand them, they're way, way more fucking cool. It's like people who like Harry Potter. Hey guys, you realize if you go back and read original mythology and stories and like all that shit, it's actually way more awesome than Harry Potter. Same shit. To
be fair, I think the main demographic of people who enjoy Harry Potter is people who would never go back and read any original mythology or other works that aren't Harry Potter related, you know? It's like as soon as I hear anyone compare anyone in like a political framework as being like Voldemort, I'm like, I can just write off that person's opinion. I feel like they also haven't investigated politics, you know. If that's like their go-to reference, it's like, fucking hell, how shallow's this pool of references you're dipping into here? Straight to Voldemort, is he? In what way is he in anywhere like Voldemort? Right, so the guest for this episode, Monty, is... Oh, actually, that reminds me as well. So since it's episode 13... Here's the thing I was actually thinking about, okay? Because we've done so few episodes of this show that I actually think we can play an interesting little game, right? Because I can't remember what the term for it was. I don't think it's an official like name for the trope, but you'll know what I mean when I describe it, right? I remember on a podcast hearing some people, like, you know, like a comedy podcast, some people describe this phenomena, right? Which is quite a fun game to play, where what you do is you think of someone from your youth, where, you know, when you were like a 14-year-old boy, this would have been the hottest woman in the world, right? And what you have to do is find the year at which you're actually hot enough that she might sleep with you, but she is like not quite no longer hot enough that you would want to sleep with her. You have to find where those two lines intersect, and that's the key moment. That's the sweet spot, you know. So my similar point along those lines, as a game for everyone who watches the show to play, is Monty is now 31 years old. So here's the question. When will the point come at which Monty is no longer more years alive than we've done episodes of this show? Will it be 2 years from now? Will it ever get there? I don't know. I can't say. Someone in Insight only got to 79 episodes. What can I say? It's possible you could, in all contexts, outlive this show, Monty. I can't know, right?
Well, I'm hoping at the very least that once Overwatch League actually starts and we can get into a better rhythm with this and have more consistent storylines, that it'll be a lot easier to do this show every week.
Okay. So here's the thing. Our guest for this week is Wolf. And for anyone who doesn't know who Wolf is, he obviously currently in Overwatch. You can see him. He's over in the Apex world. He's sort of filled that empty vacuum there. He's obviously known for Heroes of the Storm. I would say most known for doing GSL and all these sorts of things, doing StarCraft2, Pro League, most notably, was one of your favourite projects. But I would also say, personally, because I don't watch that many of those games anymore, he's mainly known to me for being an adult male, very much an adult, by the way, not in any way like a young adult, none of those terms, again, reference to Harry Potter there, but he's absolutely a fully grown man. But if you looked at his Twitter, you might be mistaken if you imagined he was just some sort of like archetypal tsundere girl from an anime, because every picture is him with food in front of him, making a sarcastic sort of comment about the food and like sort of looking at the person in a mildly hostile manner, who presumably is a friend of his because they're taking pictures of him eating food all the time. So that's how I think of you, Wolf. Why do you do that? What's this key element of your personality I'm missing here?
When I was in China for a tournament called the Gold Club World Championship for Heroes of the Storm, I brought a bunch of ramen with me. I had it ordered to the hotel because I thought this would be a really funny tweet I basically just decided, like, okay, Koreans do this a lot. They'll bring ramen to events overseas. Because they don't want to eat the food that's at the hotel. They don't trust it, or they're just not familiar with it. They'd rather just eat ramen. It's safe, or they don't like the food, whatever. So I thought it'd be funny to, because a lot of people joke that I'm Korean in Korea because I speak Korean and
you do heavily push that image also. Let's not leave that part out.
Sure.
Keep going. Yeah.
Sure.
It's the way he says that, like it's ridiculous. Like people make out like I am Korean. So anyway, I was saying that's just bullshit. Now, where do I fit the rest of this ramen and this? Let me just update my cacao before I leave the. What the fuck are you talking about? Keep going with the story. Yeah.
So I get this ramen to the hotel. Right. I have one of my talent managers send that to me. And then I have this layout of the ramen on the bed with me, and I'm wearing a robe. And you can probably find this picture online. It's one of my most successful tweets ever. And I just tweeted basically that this white dude it's like a polymerization, a joke of two words. Daehan Mingguk, which is the word for Republic of Korea. And then Migu is the word for America, so I made the name Daehan Migu Gnome. A gnome is it's like a nice kind of endearing way to make fun of someone. It's just like a bad guy, basically.
Okay. It's not like a bastard, right?
Yeah, bastard, basically. And so I made this term. I had this tweet and said, this guy, the Daehan Migu Gnome, just couldn't handle it without having instant noodles in his hotel in China, so I ordered them to the hotel. Yeah. And it was written in almost like a third person way, and even I can't believe how crazy he is. And the tweet popped off, and then I just kept making those tweets because I thought it was really funny, and I kind of became a thing in Korea.
Okay. But here's the thing, though. That story all sounded great, but I don't believe you did that just for the joke. I don't think you did take it there just for the fucking tweet. I bet you ate all the ramen afterwards, didn't you?
I ate a lot of it, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. So the joke was a joke in as much as you are aware of what you're like, but it's also true, isn't it? Anyone who thinks, okay, I think there should be a massive apology from League of Legends fans, right? In no sense does Monte actually want to be Korean, right? When he lived in Korea, he didn't spend that much time around Koreans. He didn't do Korean stuff. He just lived in his fucking house doing whatever he wanted to do anyway. Just happened to live in Korea. Occasionally did Korean things. Didn't even drink soju that often. He did whiskey, wasn't he? So in no way did Monte want to be Korean, right? LS doesn't even really want to be Korean. He just is incredibly elitist and knows that Koreans are the best, therefore associates himself with the best, ergo Koreans. Wolf wants to be Korean, secretly thinks he is Korean, but thinks he can throw you off the trail by making out like it's a joke that he wants to be Korean, when he definitely wants to be Korean in every context. You are the ultimate weeaboo, whatever the Korean version of that is. Well, it's just you, isn't it? So I'm going to use you as the reference when someone else wants to be Korean. You're just a wolf.
I've got over 200 bottles of soju in my house right now because they keep sending me bottles of soju, the soju company.
For free.
By the way, that's my favorite tweet, is the one where you're inside the pentagram, being summoned, the pentagram of soju bottles.
That's pretty good. So here's the thing, right? Obviously, this episode will be entirely about Overwatch and Wolf's involvement in Overwatch. But, I did think to myself when I was thinking up the intro, the fact that you're involved in Heroes of the Storm, you know, I mean, that's actually considered sort of a failed esport, you know. It never really got off the ground, didn't really have that many viewers. Blizzard did pump a lot of money into it, you know. They tried to make it pretty professional, you know. The Korean scene got involved, not quite on the full Kesper level, you know. And then it just never really went anywhere. And I just thought, there's no point in bringing that parallel up, is it? It's too depressing. So anyway, Overwatch. Overwatch is here. The Overwatch League, Apex, all that good shit. Right, let's start here, okay? So obviously, coming from the Apex world, it's been a while since we did anything to do with Apex, because Monty's been out in the West, obviously, now, and has long since forsaken that little 2-bit stand that he's left behind. Like that, you have to realize, to him, that was like, he's Tupac, and that was Digital Underground, you know? It was big for a while, but he's going to be bigger than that. Like, one day they'll say, oh, actually, yo, you never heard of Apex? It's that thing that Monte Cristo used to cast. And he'll go, yeah, it was, you know, I was younger, I was still developing as caster. But anyway, to you, Wolf, Apex, like pinnacle of your career, let's talk some Apex, okay? Because an interesting detail, obviously, was this GC.Busan team that kind of came out of nowhere. Like, yes, they'd been around in the challenger scene, and they'd had some good results there. But they basically gradually sort of powered up during the tournament, right? I mean, they weren't even blowing everyone away in the first groups and then the second groups, and then by the end of it, though, they were the champions, and now we obviously know they're going to be in this bizarre, like, dual lineup in Cloud9's team, basically, where it's like they've got Panthera and they've got GC.Busan, and no one quite knows what the mixture will be. So what was the story from your perspective of the GC.Busan team?
Well, you know, I said this on cast many times, and, you know, I talked to the Korean commentators about this. You know, and everyone knows this feeling where everyone's cast a tournament where you're starting off around 16, right? You look at the matches you're going to be casting that week, you start preparing for them, and you look at a matchup like LW Red versus GC.Busan, and you think, well, this might be the least interesting match I cast this month. You know, you look at it and you think to yourself, and everyone's had this before, and you think, yeah, GC.Busan, I saw their VODs and challengers, they seemed like great, but, you know, they got through, they're in Apex now, they'll have any more foreign teams for Season 4. And after I cast their first series against LW Red, where they ended up losing it 1-3, the word that always comes to mind for me for them was, oh, this team is very forgettable, very unlikely to get out of the group, and we may never see them again. I think they may drop down. That was like kind of the opening thought. But like as you say, the evolution was definitely there from group to group, from match to match, and then getting out of the group in second place, then tearing through Lunatic-Hai with a total 6-0 score, defeating them twice. And then, of course, winning the finals, the 4-3. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. So very much a leveled up team, and I think they definitely changed the way they were playing and changed the way they were practicing.
So what made them the best by the end then?
No, I think that what made them the best at the end in the grand finals was just their understanding of, they had better ult management, and they knew how to out Genji Oxal basically, and they played more defensively, whereas Runaway tried to make plays. If you go back and watch the finals, there's many times where Oxal will unsheath the Dragon Blade with no proper setup of ultimates, or will force his supports to use an ultimate, and it felt like communication wasn't there, like Oxal was just trying to Dragon Blade in these moments. And I don't know if that's a shot calling problem, or if it's just these guys are still young, and even the Runaways have been in 4 seasons of Apex, still not that experienced. You know, this is not a 3-year Overwatch pro gamer veteran we're talking about here. Whereas the engages that GC.Busan took were more reactionary, I think. And when you're popping down a bunch of ultimates, Dragon Blade, Sound Barrier, things like that, if you're the defender, if you use the Dragon Blade second, if you use the Sound Barrier second, then yours is the one that's still swinging when their Dragon Blade isn't. And if you can play around that and that mirrored composition, I think that's part of the reason why they ended up taking the finals, just that more defensive style.
It's also that I think that they switched up, and they were very much focusing on Hoxal first in a lot of those fights and trying to get the pick off onto him. A lot of times you'll see teams attempt to dive the back line and take out supports, but they switched up their style to sort of catch Hoxal's engages and then focus on eliminating him primarily. And then at that point, it looked like Runaway didn't really have any other tricks up their sleeve. They were too reliant on Hoxal's ability to make plays as the fight went on. So him dying first is a big problem. And we saw that as well in they continued that in the APAC, final as well. So sort of a similar
final, right?
Yeah, it was a repeat final. But this time, Runaway lost harder than they did in the Apex finals. It was 4-1.
Yeah, yes. I think that also it's important to note that Prophet kind of became a superstar. He was the Tracer player for the team, and eventually the Genji player in the grand finals. But
What's so interesting, like you were saying in that cast, is that he hadn't actually played Genji up until that point in time.
Exactly, and his Tracer play was really interesting. I think the reason why they defeated Lunatic-Hai 6-0, 3-0, and 3-0 was because they really were able to punish Miro's hyper-aggressive Winston plays, very predictable dive, and they were very good at knowing when Miro had already used his bubble, and then he was coming in for a dive, so he didn't have it available. They would focus him down, came in good Zenyatta play to make sure he was always discorded immediately, and they would kill Miro with pulse bombs over and over and over again with Prophet. He just sticks the pulse bomb on Winston's face, and Miro dies. And that was kind of the whole playstyle of Lunatic-Hai, is such aggressive dive with the Winston, and I think it became predictable eventually. And I think that's why they defeated them 6-0. But it's also important to note that that's not what Prophet is famous for, right? He's famous for getting those triple pulse bomb kills, or just 1v1ing the other Tracer, or running around and having these amazing highlights that you see in his highlight clips every time an Apex match is starting. I think that's one of the reasons why he has such an incredible KD stat and things like that, is because he gets these individual kills. But the playstyle team versus team, I think a lot of teams just figured out Lunatic-Hai, and I think that maybe in the new patch and the new meta, when they're of course playing as Team Soul in Overwatch League, they'll perform better. But I think at the end of the patch, they just weren't really in it.
Well, they also have new players on Soul now too. I mean, you can't, like, Fleta and Munchkin are both really fucking good, so they got some upgrades to the DPS, right? But yeah, I think what's really interesting about GC.Busan. So first off, to introduce them as Royal Roaders. So you want to explain what that means, since you're the StarCraft guy, Wolf? Sure.
So a Royal Roader is any player or team that wins a tournament that they play in for the first time. So if you played in Apex before, like Runaway, for example, if you've qualified for one before, you cannot be a Royal Roader. And there's some debate as to whether Envious is a Royal Roader team or not, because
it's the first tournament. No. You can't have a Royal Road in the first tournament because nobody's played in the tournament before. That's bullshit.
Yes. People always say that Envious is a Royal Rating team. It's not true, but
it doesn't make sense really.
But anyway, so
like the contextual premise, the whole point basically, is typically, because it's the first time you've qualified for it, it signals either you maybe just had a one-off hot tournament. There's occasional people who did that, or you're probably going to be one of the best teams or players of all time, because if in your first ever season you can get the kind of the highest accomplishment, you're probably set for a special career. So if you ever look in history at the people who did Royal Road, they either are, like I said, they were either one guy who maybe caught fire and had like a really perfect meta, or something changed in the game, or it's just the best players of all time. Like you go in StarCraft, it's like some really, really fantastic players who did it.
Yeah, Flash Royal roaded, right, in his first tournament?
No, he didn't.
No, he didn't.
He actually came top 4 in the first one. Jaedong, I think, did. There wasn't that many, actually, believe it or not.
One of the most famous ones is a very controversial player, Life, in StarCraft2.
Right. I forgot he did that.
He defeated...
That was when Zerg was mad imbalanced, so he beat MVP, yes.
Yeah, he beat MVP, and what was really cool about that finals was they made a special trophy for, like in the OSL, there's the golden mouse. Yeah. So they made this special trophy for MVP, as GSL 5 trophy, where like the S is a 5 or something like that. No one's ever gotten it, but it was like the golden mouse golden badge kind of thing. So they made this trophy for him, and it was this player trying to get his 5th title versus a Royal Roader, and he lost. And many people say that that's when MVP started to decline, is when he didn't get that 5th trophy. But yeah, that was one of the greatest Royal Roader moments in StarCraft 2.
Sure. So, and also to put this in context of team games, so the Royal Road implies that a rookie player is winning the title, which means that in a team game, all the members of the team also have to be rookies, which makes it even more difficult, generally speaking, in a team. And we nearly had Runaway do it in the second season of Apex. But obviously that's less impressive because it's only the second season. It becomes obviously much harder the longer a tournament runs to Royal Road, because there's just such a huge pool of players. We never, ever had it happen in League of Legends. Although we did get close with SK Telecom's first season when they made top 4.
Yes.
But this is like really big, that in the 4th season of a tournament, these guys from GC.Busan could come in and and it's not like they just had 6 players either, but they had 7 or 8 players, because they had Ariel and Wu Hyal like subbing out. So they even had more players on the roster than they actually needed, and they were still all rookies, and they still won. So it is like, we're probably not going to see this again for a very, very long time.
I mean, they did it too with at the beginning of the season, further than just them being a Royal Roading team, they were dropping maps to Rox Orcas, who had a very bad performance in the round of 16, dropping maps and even a series to LW Red, who only made the round of 8, didn't look very strong there. So this team at the beginning of the season looked like no one would have predicted this team was going to go. It's not like in day one when GC.Busan played, everyone, all the analysts, the Korean commentators, it's not like everyone's saying, look out for this team. Everyone was like, yeah, it's probably not going to get at groups. And then they just leveled up each and every time until they hit Lunatic-Hai, smashed them 3-0 twice. Then
yeah, it was really the quarterfinals where they got scary.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let me ask this then, Wolf, right? If this had have happened in, say, like season 2 of Apex, I think that would be more reasonable, because then, like season 1 was very experimental. Even the teams there weren't really set, actually all the Korean teams basically kept roster shuffling themselves, looking for good lineups. But the idea it could happen in season 4, and it's not just like it looks at the moment like they weren't just a one-off, because you look at the progression, they smashed Lunatic-Hai, who were considered the best team twice. They then, because of this because of this APAC tournament, they got to play Runway twice. So they've played the two best teams basically.
And they beat Panthera.
And they beat
4-0.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. They went to APAC, which was like a week or 2 weeks later than the Apex finals. They had been practicing apparently for 3 days on the new patch. And this is a wildly different patch than the last one, and they won even more convincingly. So if anything, like that speaks to me a lot about how good their longevity is going to be, because they made adaptations very fast.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 10-0 score, 3-0 against Lunatic-Hai, 3-0 against Lunatic-Hai again, then 4-0 against Cloud9 Kongdu. By the way, those two teams were in the Season 3 finals. That finals went to a Game 7. So you have this team that is not just like got a lucky run to the bracket and beat some weaker teams in the quarterfinals and then the semifinals. I mean, this is just like, I don't know if this run will ever happen again. Like, I don't know if we'll ever see this in Overwatch history, a team that was so unknown, looked so weak in the round of 16, have this dominant run.
So this is my question then, is like, none of these players, as Monty said, it's not like, they have mainly unknown players, but they had like a player from like Kongdu Unsi or something. They don't. They're all new players in theory. So does this say anything about Overwatch as a game, that you can bring an entirely fresh team in and whatever? Did they figure out the meta the best? I mean, in 6 months, will they have players who are considered at the level of all the superstar Koreans?
Yes, they will.
I think so.
Prophet's too fucking good. And Gesture as well. Both of those guys are just amazing.
I think that there's something to be said. There are some asterisks to this too, though, right? This is a very tumultuous period in Korean Overwatch, right? Kespa didn't sign the teams. Yes. Everyone knows the salaries for Apex teams are quite low. And then suddenly you have these teams become Overwatch League teams. Obviously, the rumors with LW, they pulled out of the tournament. So that was one of the strong teams. It's no longer in the tournament, right? So a lot of people say that made Apex Season 4 weaker. I would agree with that. I wouldn't say that.
It's unquestionably that's true.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say LW Blue is necessarily a favorite to win the tournament, but they were definitely a top 4 team just removed. Then you had both the Cloud9 Kongdu scenario going on and the Team Seoul scenario going on. So not only was that announced during this period, but also leading up to that, a lot of contracts are being signed, a lot of life decisions are being made, whereas GC.Busan, until very recently, obviously wasn't involved in any of that. So they were just focusing purely on the game. They're very hungry and they were very motivated because obviously they had heard rumors, they know what's going on. They want to try to get into Overwatch League as well, so I think they're very hyper-motivated in this moment. But like Lunatic-Hai's glaring problems with their tank play, their Winston play, for example, from Miro, I think, it's tough to fix those problems, even if you have a great coaching staff, and getting better, obviously, if they become Team Seoul and have all that Overwatch League money, and they can use that to invest into even a larger coaching staff and things like that. But during this time with all these contract negotiations, all this stuff, like, I think that we do have to remember that these teams are not practicing non-stop all the time. It's not the only thing on their mind like it was in Season 3, for example.
Sure.
Also Overwatch World Cup as well.
That's right, because most of the Lunatic-Hai players are also practicing on that, on a different patch, and everything else that's going on with that. So yeah, there was
definitely a lot of disruption. I agree with Wolf to this season, and you also have to remember that I'm not saying that they didn't try. I don't know if they how much they were practicing, if they were up to and I don't know what their motivation was, but there's also the possibility that their motivation is just lower. I mean, if you know that Owl's coming up and you're already signed to an Overwatch League roster, then how seriously are you going to be taking Apex practice at the time, as opposed to, and I'm not saying this decision is made because I don't know what the teams were up to, but as opposed to trying out new members for your squad that aren't on your potential Apex roster, because we know they have Fleta and Munchkin now for Lunatic-Hai. There's like a lot of questions for sure.
Yeah, don't forget also for Cloud9 or Cloud9 Kongdu, or Panthera, whatever you want to call them, right? Depending on which part of the tournament they're in, going through a lot of internal drama because of the Twitter bitches drama, which you can look up. Basically, Bedosian posting and Rascal posting on the internet that they were, or just somebody was streaming. I don't remember who was streaming. It might have been Void or Bedosian in the background. It's overheard talking about, Twitter bitches, as in like the haters on Twitter. They don't know anything. Sort of comments made. I don't know the exact quote, but the community was very frustrated with these players at the time. And for anyone who's watching who follows Korean esports, even though sometimes it looks like some sort of drama might be silly, and overblown, it does end up becoming, I think, a stressful factor for these very young kids, especially players on the level of and with the fan bases of teams like Lunatic-Hai and Cloud9 Kongdu. So I think that's something that really makes a huge impact. If you go back and watch the Seoul Cup, where Cloud9 Kongdu and Lunatic-Hai both participated in that tournament with some of the Chinese teams like Miraculous Youngster, you could see that the players of Cloud9 Kongdu visibly look upset and stressed out. It was like right after that happened, you can actually see them on stage. And I'm not implying that like I could see a player's facial expression on stage and know that he's stressed out about this one particular thing, but that was surely the sentiment, right?
It definitely does affect you at some level.
Plus, I've just noticed in general, first of all, like what Rolf's referring to here is basically how Korean culture generally seems to operate, especially when it gets to like celebrities and stuff like that, which is that like not only in social circumstances are you supposed to like be honorable and never disrespect someone, but for some bizarre reason, you just can't get away with what is actually fairly commonplace. Like in the West, for example, say a basketball player afterwards got booed by some of the fans, and he was like, oh, well, those fans don't know anything, That might be like, that'd be an article, but that'd be it. No one would be like, and what should be done with this? Should they fire him or something? No. In fact, they might just do, to close the whole case down, they might just do like a fake fine. Like, oh, we fined him $10,000, some guy makes like 500 grand a game or something, But no one would actually care about it. But in Korea, that sort of shit for like, sometimes like a week will just be like, it's like the fucking 24 news hour spin cycle just goes into high mode, and then those players are just barraged by it. That's why I've always thought, right, one area that Westerners, when they play Koreans, have absolutely failed on every categorical level is they don't understand psychological warfare. Because knowing Koreans, except for the rare few that are like, insanely mentally strong and, might actually somehow get even better if you piss them off, I wouldn't be going to these Koreans like being really respectful, like, oh, thank you, oh, I'd love to play you, Faker, or whatever. Like, I'd just be, when I go up to like shake hands, on the first day, or if I know I'm going to play them again in the tournament, I'd be talking buku mad shit in that guy's ear. I'd be like, I won't say what I'll say now, because even now people would get mad, but put it this way, people's family members would be getting involved. I'd be talking, listen, you already know I'd be going on the countries on the list right there. I'd be talking about fucking North Korea. Like, I'd be going so off the reservation. It'd be wild.
That does happen. That does happen in some of these Korean finals. I think like the best trash talk. Like,
they know how to do it within bounds, though.
No. There was one instance. It was the finals between the Tigers and SK Telecom, where Nofe was just like unscripted shit talking Koma on stage before the game, and Koma just starts looking angrier and angrier, and then they get, the Tigers got stomped. But it was like, you should go back and watch that pregame if you haven't seen it. You want to see some good shit talk. This was like 2015. It was like spring 2015. I think it was that final.
The first one they played, yeah.
Yeah. It was a fucking amazing, though.
I want to talk about this for a second because, people always wonder, like, when we talk about this, when I tell people about this back in the West, other esports casters out here, in LA, whatever, and I describe this Twitter drama and things like that, they go, that's weird, that happens in Overwatch a lot. It doesn't really feel like it happens in League of Legends as much. Or it doesn't really feel like it happened in StarCraft as much. Why is that? Yeah,
except for Bang just got into all this shit.
Sure. Bang recently is the exception. But if you compare how much has happened in the last month
so why do you think that is, Wolf?
So I think we all know why it is, right? It's because these teams don't have, an organization, a player organization like Kespa above them, right? So there's not really stringent rules in terms of
come on. I don't think that's the reason why. Like, I think to a certain degree, but a lot of this shit was like them digging up garbage from Flower when he was like 14, and nothing can save you from that. You know what I mean?
Sure,
Kespa can't save you from that.
Sure,
shit.
Kespa can't save you, but they might have altered the course of how that was perceived. With
here's the thing,
and things like that. Like,
you could surely counter that by saying the difference is if you'd grown up and been 14 in a game where Kespa already controlled the scene, and to even become a practice party and you join it probably never would happen, right?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily counter it, but I think it's got to be context, right?
I think that this is something that we have to talk about in Korea at the moment, because a lot of these teams and soon to be potentially contenders teams that are trying to get into Overwatch League coming forward, a lot of these teams are just sponsorless, right? And you don't have any sort of structure. In fact, most people don't know this, but most Korean Overwatch players are full-time streamers who became players, right? You look at a player like Evermore, for example. Like, he played Apex for a little while, then he was like, well, I'm just actually a streamer, by the way, so I'm going to do PUBG now, and I'm going to move on, and I'm going to do this. Haksel streams almost every day. People don't know that. People think the Korean mindset of like, oh, these guys live in a team house and have this 12-hour StarCraft schedule, this League of Legends schedule, like the bunk beds, and they're in the team house. And Runaway just recently got a team house, first of all, and he streams nonstop, right? He's a streamer. And in other high-level competitive esports where Koreans were really dominant, like if you look at StarCraft2 right now, we've already got several Koreans eliminated from BlizzCon because they don't, that same training regimen isn't there. Being Korean by blood is not why these teams are always so much stronger, right? It's that practice regimen, it's the structure.
Well, but I mean, even these more amateur teams though that are involved in Overwatch still have a much higher, I would say, bare minimum threshold for practice.
No, I'm not saying it's the only thing that makes this happen, right? But I think that's one of the discouraging things in Korea right now is just the lack of that structure, salaries, things like that. And if you want to be a new pro gamer, if you're trying to decide whether you want to play League of Legends or Overwatch, like the lack of structure there, the lack of like an amateur system to become a rookie, to be scouted, and things that exist in LCK now in League of Legends with Kespa, existed in Pro League, which was also franchised. People always talk about like, oh, LCS again, franchise Overwatch League. Like, this is the first time it's happened. It's not true. Pro League was a franchise league. When you have all that structure, I think it really adds a lot of stability. It makes you feel like, okay, I'm working towards this. I can become an amateur. Then there's this trading period, and I can do this and this and this. You can explain it to your family, explain it to your parents. And in Kespa is all, you're not streaming really. Until very recently, right? With Faker starting to stream and things like this. So the amount of things you could do PR-wise to protect, or not necessarily protect, actually really enclose or somewhat imprison players from being able to make statements or accidentally piss off their fans or ruin your brand and things like that. Those things aren't there. So I think that's why Overwatch, even though the players are training really hard and they're very much making schedules for themselves and have good coaches and things like that, at least at the top end of things, I think that's why it does seem a little bit more like Wild West for Apex and for the Overwatch teams in Korea compared to League of Legends, compared to StarCraft in the past.
Okay. Right. Since GC.Busan, as you referenced at the time, I mean, they were obviously like rookies, so no, they weren't signed to an Overwatch League team. But then, old Jack from Cloud9, now known as London Spitfire, apparently, decided to sign them
neither
as
confirm nor deny that is true.
Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But in my world, they are. Okay, so we're, theoretically, hypothetically, if they were called the London Spitfire, then
well, for the purposes of this conversation, we shall all agree to refer to them as London Spitfire, so that we have a way to refer to them.
Then what happened is, right, what I like about Jack apparently is, see, I used to worry, right, that when he was in League of Legends, it turned out I was wrong on this, right, but I actually worried that originally the reason why he kept that first Cloud9 lineup for so long is that he was one of those owners who was like too sentimental, would never let a player go. But actually, if you notice, ever since then, he was actually pretty ruthless. He did manage to get High out of the way and bring in Incarnation. He did manage to get fucking Impact into the team, rush into the... he gradually got out everyone he didn't really want or didn't think was up to the par anymore. He got in new players. Well, in Overwatch, he's just taken that concept even further. He was like, right, I've got a team. It's from NA. You know what? You guys are all right. And you know what? I'm looking forward to the... What's that? European teams available? Laser Quick? Yeah, get them in, actually. Then he got them in and he was like, you know what? Listen, guys, I know you just moved all your stuff in, but I've kind of got Kongdu Panthera to join, so I'm going to have to let you go. And then Kongdu Panthera's like just about to get on their plane. And they're like, yeah, not bad, still top 4 in Apex. And he's like, yeah, you know that team that beat you? Yeah, I've got them as well. And it's like...
That is a rumor, sir. That is a rumor.
But is in a world where hypothetically he had in fact gotten GC.Busan, is he just constructing some sort of battle royale in his house?
A team called the London Spitfire theoretically had both the GC.Busan and the Kongdu Panthera roster. Yes. What would we think about that?
In such a world, what would you think about that? Not what would you think about that?
So what I love about this whole thing, by the way, Thorin, is you remember that esports salon we did with Noah and Jack? And we were talking about...
That one aged like fine wine, by the way. That one aged like fine wine in the context of everyone who was in that chat, if you think about it.
I know, it's amazing, right? It is actually really funny. So I was actually afraid for a little bit there that what Immortals was going to... Like, they would just both do exactly the opposite of what they said in that show, which is that Jack was going to get like a European roster instead of getting the best possible roster he could for London. And being all Korean, because Jack was the one famously saying in that episode, like, I don't care, I just want to win. It doesn't really matter to me. And Noah was the one saying, no, it's not just about winning. Like, I want to have a relatable squad and everything like that. So I thought for a while there, like when Fate and Kareev came over to Immortals, I was like, well, you know, they're just going to eventually go full Korean. And then I was afraid that Jack, once he hired all those European players, was just going to like, you know, try and fill up his roster with good European players. And instead, Jack just he pulled the ultimate 180 by having a European squad for like 2 weeks and then decided that he was just going to buy Kongdu and then allegedly also get GC.Busan, which, I mean, I'm super excited over the fact that both of those rosters are together and those guys are all going to be fighting it out for a starting place. And I think there's been some interesting theories out there about whether or not these players will have synergy. But I think that these players have several months now, if they are indeed, as it is rumored to be on this one roster, they'll have several months now to work their shit out and try and figure out what's going to be the best strategy for this group of players moving forward. But holy shit, is that roster strong, if true.
And obviously you have to add in that since they have Korean coaches as well, if they bring the traditional approach Korean coaches tend to take, they're also ruthless as fuck. Like, they're not going to be like, oh, but haha, GC.Busan, you won all the tournaments, we will keep your whole lineup intact. No, they absolutely will have to compete for every spot, probably, internally, you know.
Well, it's just like the fucking talent on that team is actually insane. It seems like, for whatever reason, the rumor is that Void didn't really fit with the team. And that Waka Waka isn't going to be on the team either. But, I mean, if they picked up the GC.Busan players, I think they absolutely have good alternates, you know, to Void with, like, Woo Hyal has been playing really, really well.
Woo Hyal is really good.
He's really fucking good.
I think he's way better than Void, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Void was good at Diva, but I don't think he has the versatility necessary that Woo Hyal has. And they also, GC.Busan already had 2 flex players. They also had Ariel as a backup, so it's not like they were just down to 1 anyway. But if you just fucking think about, like, Bird Ring combined with Prophet and Hureg, that is just, like, mind-blowing DPS.
Let's not forget about Curious, who can play, you know, Hanzo and shit like that. The Junkrat you can play on, you know, attack. On maps like Kings Row and things like that. Like he's like very rarely played, but in specific situations he's also a strong sub, and I think would be very valuable in certain metas. So I think it's really interesting that a lot of people are surprised that okay, well, I'm going to say this sentence and people it's going to come out weird, but I'm very surprised that people think it's weird that a London team is picking up potentially two Korean squads. But I think that right now, obviously with no region locking in Overwatch League and everyone's scrambling to get players together and put everything you know, into these new teams for the league, you see nothing but, if you look at the Western players on Twitter, didn't get into Overwatch League or aren't getting into Overwatch League, you see all sorts of tweets along the lines of, this team only hired their friends, or I don't know, my team had all this money but we didn't get picked, or I know a lot of people really don't like me, but there's a perception that a lot of people really don't like me, but actually everyone really does like me in the scene, and I'm really good, but I still can't get on these teams, and like everything's screwed, and or Blizzard did this, and there's all these problems, and you know, such and such player kicked me out, and all this drama, right? Imagine trying to build like a 6 to 12 man roster out of North American and European players who are acting like this and complaining about who's doing what and all this drama, who they want to build a super roster and things like that. It's much easier to build a roster that was already built, has championship experience, has synergy and things like that. Just port it into a team. That's why I think this is happening, because why would you? Well, people are so surprised, like, oh, they support the Korean teams. Like, don't they want to build a team for London? Like, none of them are from London. Like, well, I mean, yes, but
you know what's the best way to get fans, Wolf? The best way to get fans is just to fucking win. And it seems to me that that's what Jack wants to do. I mean, you have to look at this roster and immediately say that they're the favorites, at least preliminarily, for Overwatch League Season 1. Not only are they the reigning champions, I mean, certainly Seoul's team is also looking quite scary, especially with the upgrades. And also, the Seoul Dynasty team has said they haven't even finished with their roster yet. So we know they're going to make more announcements. They said it it's in November, first or second week in November, they're going to make their final roster announcements. So a lot of these players are still being signed from Korea. So it's definitely not like done and dusted. Like, there haven't even been rumors about where the runaway guys are going. Clearly those guys are going somewhere. Like, Stitch has to be in this league. You know what I mean? So
they have an announcement coming up too, they said. So I imagine.
Yeah, there's maybe Runaway will be split up in some way, but regardless, like, I just think that you look at this fucking lineup, and you've got to be super hyped for it. Like, even if a lot of people use the excuse, well, they're not Europeans, and in some way, I guess it is sort of a bummer. Even I will admit this, that the one European team is like all Korean, but it's also those players are so fucking good that I'd be pretty hyped if I were a London fan to watch this roster play, because you've got a really strong shot at that first title.
Yeah. The only thing that sucks, though, is here's the thing, right? For Cloud9 or London Spitfire, or hypothetically whoever indeed does get GC.Busan, obviously they don't care about this detail, but it does in a way suck that what would be two of the strongest teams are going to be in one squad, so we won't have them like both competing elsewhere in the Overwatch League. That's the one downside, I'd say. You know? Like, you have too much talent. Like, it's not cool if like Rascal just gets sat on the bench, you know, like he should be a starting player in Overwatch League.
But I think that problem will sort itself out. I mean, we can discuss this for a little bit, Duncan, but in regards to your video that you made about the problems with the Korean players on Overwatch League rosters, which I do agree with you on some of those points, and I think a lot of those issues are present now in year one, but as the league expands in the future and we get more Korean teams, or even just more teams that can have Korean players, because we know the announcement for Overwatch League is that they want to expand into a globalized structure. I think that it's sort of a growing pain right now that should be alleviated in time. But this was always going to be inevitable. And yes, I do agree. Like, it sucks that maybe Rascal is going to be sitting on a bench given the level of his skill. But unfortunately, it's better to have him on the on a potential bench situation, and maybe he gets sold to a different team later on and gets to be a starter, but still has the stability of Overwatch League and the practice of Overwatch League for the time being. Because a lot of the teams not a lot, but some of the teams that came into the league had very specific philosophies about how they wanted to build the team. And some teams don't care about building with all Koreans. I mean, look at New York, look at, allegedly London. These are teams that didn't care. And then there are other teams like Boston that I think really, and LA, the Immortals Valiant, as they're going to be called now, the Immortals roster, that really do care about having a mixed roster, or at least having Western players on their roster. So given that, there just wasn't, I think, enough space for a guy like Rascal to potentially start, as weird as that sounds.
I have like my own personal issue with it. So obviously I live in Korea and cast Apex. So for me, some of the most historic tournaments and stories you can have for StarCraft, League of Legends, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm even, is a team that plays for several years, has an up and downward spiral, swings, the storyline of that team that plays for several years, has roster changes, rebuilds, things like that. A team like SKT, or even like Rocks Tigers, still, an organization in LCK, but even though they're world champions, very weak now comparatively. But if all the best teams just always get absorbed into Overwatch League, it does hurt the stories of Apex, I think, because you're not going to have these story teams. the Royal Rotor term will actually mean less in moments like with this, where you have the best teams just being pulled away nonstop. You also have, stories of like, oh, we have this repeat team run away in that 4 seasons, 2 finals. So I think when you take those away, it becomes less interesting.
Here's the thing, though, Wolf. I don't actually think you have to worry as much, because just think through this perspective, okay? So one of the points I made in my video was something that I've addressed on this show before, which is I don't actually blame the Overwatch League, because there was actually no perfect solution. Like, let's say, for example, okay, that they'd taken all 12 teams were just all the best Korean teams, right? That would solve my whole argument of, like, maybe you left some of the best Korean players behind, or maybe, we just don't know it, but next season the best team will be, for example, maybe Red is their best team next season, and no one knows it now, so they're not an Overwatch League. And so, like with GC.Busan this season, suddenly they're the best team, and it would be weird for the best team not to be an Overwatch League. But let's say you had gone the other way and you'd signed all the Korean teams. Now you've got no Westerners, so now you're threatening the idea that maybe people won't be as interested anymore, because now Overwatch League is Apex. So in that world, I don't think the point I'm going to make here is this: unless they expand the league to like 40 teams, let's say in 2 years there's twice as many teams. That's pretty bold, by the way, to get 12 more franchises involved. Even with 24 teams, you can still only recruit so many entire teams from Korea. They could recruit the next 5 Apex champions, and as you're saying, Wolf, take them out of the ecosystem. But then you're going to have too many Koreans of anything. So actually, I think that will happen to a degree. There's something to worry about there, but it can't happen too much, right? Just logistically.
Yeah, I mean, if the tournament continues for 5, 10 more years, then eventually it won't matter. It does matter now, though.
Sure.
Well, I think it does matter now. I agree. And I think it's inevitable that Apex turns into a feeder league, obviously, because everybody's going to recognize that probably the best amateur talents are going to be coming out of Korea for the most part. And I think that really it's up to Blizzard to continue Apex and to continue contenders in a way that makes sense and can continue to foster talent, which I know that, from working with Blizzard, that they're planning on doing. So I guess I have more confidence because I know that they're very focused on that path to pro. But I think in the interim, Thorin, you're right. It does suck, but there wasn't going to be a perfect solution to this problem. The perfect solution to this problem is that we just wait basically until, like you say, there's 24 or more teams in the league, and there's going to be multiple Korean teams, based out of Busan maybe, or another. I mean, odds are we're not just going to have one Seoul team, right? That's dumb, but probably more than one Seoul team. But as soon as more franchises show up, you're going to be able to absorb a lot more of those players, and the rest of them will be dispersed throughout the rest of the league, because obviously there will be a lot of worthwhile starters, and even other teams like New York will go for a full Korean roster. So it's just, and also as another counterpoint, even if at least in Overwatch, you can't say like Envy Dallas Fuel is undeniably like a top 5 team in the world, right? They're super good. So there wasn't ever going to be a world where we had all 12, like we wouldn't say that the top 12 teams were. So I guess what's nice about Overwatch is, like, I was excited about Overwatch League because I felt like there were a lot of good Western players that were scattered amongst all these other teams. And what I was really excited about was, out of all the amateur teams and the contenders teams, like everybody just getting crushed down into a few teams, which were going to be much stronger in the long run. Now, has that exactly worked out the way I thought? I mean, I'm not super psyched about Boston's roster. Let's be real, but
a couple of rosters are straight garbage. Let's be real. There's a couple of them actually legit terrible, but that's also good, Monty, because now we get to learn a role called general manager, and some of them will be fired, and better general managers will be found, and they will be hailed and perhaps given awards. So that's a positive. We also don't even know at this point, we don't even know the strictures that these general managers were given. Like, I don't know what kind of budget Huck had to work with for the Boston team. So I don't want to just throw him under the bus. I think when he just joined, he said, like, can I have like a +2? Can I bring like 2 friends with me or something? I don't want to be lonely when I'm there. So,
so I have a feeling just from looking at that roster and from knowing Huck that he may not have had a super large budget to work with, because obviously Huck was very involved in the scene, and he knows who's good. So, but he also may have his own philosophy that he wants to try out when doing this. And he said that in his little Twitter AMA that he did, he said he was looking for coachability for the players as the primary and like a desire to improve. So it's so early in the history of Overwatch, and the odds are pretty overwhelming that most of the, you know, the great players haven't even emerged yet. So if he can find some diamonds in the rough, then like until we see that team in action, I guess I feel like we have to have some level of confidence in his philosophy, because these are such unknown players that maybe he's being really smart and we just don't know it yet. But it certainly doesn't look that way.
I've got an interesting premise for you though. Like, here's a question for you, okay, right? In a league which thus far has no import rules, hence why you can be a North American franchise and sign an entire, or perhaps the London franchise and sign multiple entire Korean teams to your side. Here's a premise that I want to run by you, right? Because I can't really see how this doesn't become an issue, right? Unless we manage to get to a world in which the main thing that increases in the first few seasons is viewership. And let's say one day Noah Winston's dream becomes true and you can just have players who may not even be the best. Yes, you'd like them to be the best, but the main thing is you can market them and, you know, this guy's from Dallas and this guy's from wherever else, and they become huge stars and they have great personalities, and all they have to be is good enough to play in the league. You know, maybe they're like middle tier or whatever, right? Unless that world exists, I can already see a problem where it swings the other way. So for example, as we're saying here, every time someone wins Apex and looks good, the temptation is going to be either, at the very least, strip mine the talent or just get the entire team. So if you're a team in Overwatch right now, let's say, as I'm sure everyone in this chat assumes, that in the first season, teams like Kongdu, GC.Busan Mix, Lunatic-Hai will basically probably win the league. They will probably show themselves to be a step better than, first of all, some of the shit lineups we've just referenced, which aren't even teams. You know, they're just mishmash of players. And then even lineups that have some good players, you know, some of the FNGRE guys and the Envious guys, it's not certain they'll be the best. So if it's proven early on that Koreans win, basically, and it becomes anything like a League of Legends StarCraft scenario, the temptation is going to be to gradually phase out players that are Western and get the hot new Korean talent. So won't it just flood the league with Koreans then?
I don't think so, because there are a lot of really talented Western players in Overwatch, and we've seen, like with Dallas Fuel, with Envy, that you can be successful on these mixed rosters. So I think actually, you know, Envy doing so well and consistently, you know, winning or placing top 4 in Apex and dominating the West, I think that it shows that if you have the right mixture of players, then you can go really far. And I do think, at least in Overwatch, that there are some very strong rosters of Western players that can be made.
I'd buy into that if there were more teams like Envy, but I think just one team is like not a case yet.
But what I'm saying is you can make other teams like Envy. This is what I was hoping for, is that when we had fewer teams,
sure,
and half the teams were Korean, that it would cause this, you know, collapse of talent onto, you know, a more limited number of rosters. And look, I think that this first season of Overwatch League is just going to be massively chaotic for a lot of reasons, because I mean, there's so many unknowns. Think about how many players that are coming into this, especially the Western players that simply don't have any kind of LAN experience. We've seen that, for example, Logix, who's a player who's great online but tends to struggle at LAN. Is he a player that's going to stay on Misfits for very long? And Misfits is also, you know, a pretty good team. So, and I think as they round out their roster, they'll also figure out some new strengths. But, you know, these are players that we just need to wait and see exactly how they're going to perform, because there's too many unknowns right now. And we're going to see a lot of roster movement, whether that's going to be picking up a bunch of new teams from Apex to replace old players. And it's going to take probably a few seasons for people to have the necessary data about players to say, okay, no, we're keeping this guy for a long time. This guy's clearly like a star player. We don't need to replace him. So I guess my answer to your question is, like, in the short term, I think we could see a lot of upheaval, but I think as like the good players are identified and we have a statistical basis to really judge them and a lot more LAN film to watch of them, that over time that's going to die down. But with a new scene, it's always just going to be a churn of trying to find players as fast as you can.
What do you think? Well, do you think, I want to ask Monte the question of what do you think happens if that doesn't happen and it is just eventually like 95% Korean? Is that a problem? Does roster locking need to be implemented? I mean, sure. Well, I mean, just for the league and things like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just feels like it it doesn't necessarily, it's not a problem for me, right? Because I just want to watch the best players play the game, right? I don't really care like where they're from or, you know, what language they speak or like whether they have acne on their face or not. Like, but yeah, so I guess I kind of agree with most of what Monty is saying about the potential, but I'm not really sold on it. You know, I think Envious as a team, for example, if you look at them as a really unusual case, like you can't tell me that like it's a good strategy or like it will happen again that when someone like Tailspin leaves the team and Mickey comes in from, you know, I met him at BlizzCon and like this guy's really good on Diva, let's play him and they're going to win a grand finals and we're going to win 4-0. Like no one could have predicted that and no one could have said like, okay, this was the right move to do, right? So I think it's.
But they keep making smart roster moves. That's the thing.
Yeah, sure,
like,
sure.
They added Seagull and XQC, and like these are players that filled out, I think, weaknesses in their rosters, and I think they're playing the roster game really intelligently right now.
Sure, I think if we have more teams doing that than just the one that's doing it correctly, like I think the one case doesn't necessarily prove that we'll see more teams like this.
I think Misfits will do it as well. I think Misfits has a chance right now to add some more players to their roster, and I think that's probably going to turn out to be a pretty successful experiment too. I mean, they did get better, and I think that they, as soon as they broke with using their all Swedish lineup and brought in players from other countries, I think they're going to be, you know, they have a chance to be really strong. Especially, I think if they sign some of those guys from Giganti to fill out some of their weaknesses, they could be quite good. Not that I've heard anything about that happening, but there's a lot of opportunities for these Overwatch League teams, and I really do believe that there is enough Western talent to be competitive as long as people are smart about how they sign these rosters.
But that's the problem for me, is that all of this, okay, even when people were conceptualizing the Overwatch League, almost does imagine a scenario where you have both. Like, let me put it this way, okay? There are two ways to succeed as someone who runs a sports franchise. You can win, you can just be a champion, or you can have massive success with your fan base. Right? Those are the two ways. And there are actually teams, famously, where they might not have had that much success. I mean, I would pick someone like the Dallas Cowboys, but I bet they've done fucking bananas business over the last, like, 20, 30 years.
Like, the Cowboys have won a bunch of Super Bowls, though. Like,
it was in, like, the 90s, though, mate.
Yeah,
but
that
was a while ago now, mate.
Eagles, right.
Sure. But the point is, we're picking out teams that actually have a lot of success with their fan base, right? And regardless of whether they win or not. The problem is, at the moment, at day one of Overwatch League, that can't be your focus. Like, it would be really stupid, okay, if someone had taken all their budget for Overwatch League Season 1 and spent the majority of it on marketing and, like, building a fan base and getting fan rallies and getting their fan club set up and figuring out how to, you know, do photo shoots of the players. On day one, they're actually better off trying to have the best team in Overwatch League and then start taking care of the rest of the stuff as you go. So the big problem I see is this. Most of the owners, in theory, or the GMs rather, I guess, with the person doing this, their only way to compete right now is to try and have the best team in the league. So if you see that, okay, let's say Envious is the rare exception and they can have Koreans and Westerners and they do really well. Let's say they finish top 4 or they contend for the title. If all the same, the other 3 teams in the top 4 are all Korean teams as well, that's the point as well, lineups with all Korean players and they smash, then first of all, it's going to make me, if I'm like in the 11th place franchise, much more tempted to say, why keep any of these Korean players? Why don't I just get the next Apex champion and get the entire squad?
Yeah,
like, why would I bring over? Like, why would I bring over just the really good DPS and tank when their entire team just showed me they're really good? And if I get them right now, I have a competitive advantage over everyone maybe who isn't top 2.
I think that that is kind of a problem, right? Because then you struggle to build the story of the team. It's like not believable if you just, especially this early, right? Maybe you can say this in 3 years' time when, you know, Envious doesn't have the same roster, but it's built such a reputation. It doesn't really matter who's on the roster. You feel like there's an identity, and then the marketing stuff you're talking about, all this stuff comes with that. But I think it is a problem if, like, for the first season, the 11th place team just sells all their players and buys the next Apex champion. Especially if this previous roster was Korean as well, because you're like, just starting to adjust to it.
Let's say, okay, that season 1 had happened 4 months ago, right? And Laser Kittens had been Cloud9's lineup, and then they'd gotten the chance to get these 2 Korean teams, and they got them in. Like, the storyline's non-existent there. You just literally erased history and put a new team in, right?
I bought it. Yeah, here you go. I bought a new one. Yeah, basically, it's like you know, if your dog dies and you buy a new one, it's like not the same dog, and like it's not going to be the same thing at all.
I just think that's going to be unavoidable at the start of a league. Like, we're just going to see a huge amount of churn. Like, I just think that's it. Like, and it's not like Apex is going to be. I think you guys are exaggerating because first off, the transfer rules and transfer window, like we know that I believe we're on October 30th. The signing window for Overwatch League closes today or tomorrow. Okay. It's one of the two. It's either 30th or the 31st. I forget off the top of my head. But we don't know during the league what the transfer rules or the eligibility rules are going to be. Okay. So how many roster swaps, trades, new signings are going to be available during the regular season? We don't know that yet. And also,
by the way, sidebar, that would make it fucking super hilarious, some of these bad squads, if you're like only allowed to add 2 players in like 1 year. Like that's like being on a ship that's sinking and you get a tiny little thimble to like get the water out. Like, doesn't matter how fast you go, does it? Like,
well, so if that's true, but I'm just saying that with
sure,
APEX,
yeah.
We only, as the tournament keeps running, we might have 1 or 2 additional Apex tournaments during the run of the Overwatch League next year. And if that's true, then maybe we won't see anybody actually swap out till the end of the first season of Overwatch League. And let's be real, if you're the last place team in Overwatch League, is anybody going to shed any tears if, let's say I'm a fan of let's just say Seattle, there's not a Seattle team, the Seattle Overwatch League team, and they are the worst fucking team in the league. And I'm like I'm a fan of Seattle. I'm from Seattle. I want to watch this team do well. Is anybody going to shed any tears if the entire roster is ditched and the Apex champion is picked up? Fuck no. That's actually hype. That's actually good for the fan base. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to be super sad that the crap.
Oh, by the way, I'm not sad in any way. My concern is this. I never, personally, if anyone's watched any episodes of this show or any esports salon episodes, I have never bought the idea that you have to like geolocate all these teams and that's where the success will come from. So I've never been on that train from day one. So I think it's great that Koreans, as I'm saying, I think will inevitably take over the league because of competitive advantage, where you see what someone else does that's succeeding. Why don't you do it as well? Why would you stick with, I'll try and make one Korean work with a French guy and a guy from Germany? Like, why would I waste my time doing that when I can get as many of these Koreans as I can? So I think it's good.
Well,
My problem is just this.
But the way everyone else you and I would GM a team is very different, right? Like, I'm saying we would GM that way, right? Yes. I would definitely fucking do what Jack is doing. I would do what New York is doing, right? I would be that guy, right? So, but I do see that there is value to the other side of it. And I can't say that you can't make it work, because if Envy has made it work in this game, they are legitimately a top team in the world.
I agree, again, with the same sort of asterisk I gave earlier, but the only question becomes, when Overwatch League was announced, and we had the, Crusher 69 video and all that stuff, you play on the ladder, you rise to the top of GM, then you get signed to a team, you get your paycheck, this whole idea of, what is Overwatch League? Like, what is it? You play contenders, you get there. How motivated are the players who are trying to make it, trying to get on these teams? I'm talking Western players, when it just feels like Koreans are the best and they're just going to buy new ones, and what are you really fighting for? I think it affects the Western pro scene in that way.
Well, again, I think that's up to Blizzard to put in a fucking robust contender scene then, right? That's on them to provide opportunities for these players and give them something to play for.
I mean, I'm just saying in terms of Overwatch League specifically, I feel like it's very frustrating to Western pro gamers who are trying as hard as they can, but they don't have this great feeder system like Apex. So as you say, contenders will have to be very good, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I'm not sold necessarily on how that transition will happen.
I mean, what you should do is
I don't fucking even buy that, because frankly, if you have the competitive drive to want to be a top tier player, it's not a rational thing. And so I don't think anybody in the West who's actually it might stop some of the shittier potential pros. But if you're going to be a fucking world class player, are you really just going to sit there and be like, oh, well, why even try? I'm just going to get my ass handed to me by Koreans. That's not a mentality that people who grind out this shit even have. So I guess,
to be fair, Wolf, you did just refer to the fact. And by the way, if we were to generally categorize the people who cried on Twitter that they didn't get into Overwatch League, they were all borderline people. None of them were fucking superstars. They were all people where it's mate, you needed every connection and every friend and the best public image to get in this league, and you have just done the exact opposite. You're never getting in now.
And also, because there is a drive to use Western players, being a Western player is almost affirmative action for being in Overwatch League, because they want, people would if you want to build up a fan base, it's easier to do that with people people who speak English. So people, I think they'll take risks. Honestly, I think a lot of these people will take risks on up and coming Western players to try and develop that talent. And some teams will value that much higher than just going and getting the next Korean player. What I think is going to happen is we're going to end up with a league where some of the teams are just going to be like all Korean forever, and then some of the teams are going to end up trying to patch together and be like Western identity teams. You know what I mean? And that's just going to come in time as teams figure out their identity and figure out what works for them.
I've got a good one for you, Monty. I've actually just figured out the perfect solution to all the problems we've just listed, right? Are you ready? This is how you solve it. So right, if you're Blizzard, right, you get that list of people we were referring to before, you know, some of the XE United people, some of the people who were in that TSM squad, the ones who all complained, like, you know, I'm good enough, but, you know, I didn't get a chance. You get all of those players and you send them all to Korea, right? And you tell every Apex team, you must take 2 of these Westerners. And what you're doing is, right, it's going to show that your players can play with people who speak in English, right? They're going to be training to one day be in the Overwatch League. These guys get to have a career there and be the, like, you know, they're like sort of the test dummies for the Koreans to learn English, like how to, this is how I communicate with a really toxic individual. Oh, okay. And also, obviously, here's the secret part. This gets deeper, Wolf. Then that will also teach these particular Western players not to be Twitter bitches, because when you do that, you get in massive trouble if you're in Korea. That's going to really affect your career. So we're going to improve everyone in this way. I've brought it together.
It's the opposite. You know, you get the players go over there, they're like, the Korean fans are like, oh, they're learning Korean. Like, you know, they're like the faceless Westerners, but they're like really trying to learn Korean.
Oh, sick of these fucking Westerners coming over here taking Apex spots.
Taking Apex money.
Exactly.
Korean.
I mean, listen, dude, you're only here because we needed a Westerner in our team. You know, there's so many players could do your job better than you.
I think actually, jokes aside, that Western teams, you know, if you're super confident that you deserve to be an owl and you're a Western player, why don't you just get together with 5 other guys and go hang out in Korea and play in Apex next year instead of look, you'll get better practice probably than you would in contenders, right? And if you win, you look even sicker, and you're definitely going to get on an owl team at that point.
Here's what I would do. I would crowdfund it, right? Because obviously, like, if you're actually a pretty good team, you know, people might pay for it. And when you go to Apex, enter under the name Immortals, because that name is now free, actually, to be used in games such as Overwatch and many games, actually, League of Legends as well, you know. So I'd call yourselves the Immortals, because the thing about the Immortals is that represents the value that you will never die, you'll never give up, and you will always inevitably win all your battles, internal or professional. You know, I'm actually now known as Immortals. I've changed my name, my alias. I'm not going to be hosting the show as Immortals. But anyway, just to tie all that together, if you just want a good laugh, just go back and you know that famous thing, Monty, that like comedy is tragedy plus time. Just go back and watch the tragedy of Noah Winston on that esports salon episode in the context of what we now know about that, and that's Shakespearean, isn't it? It's some brutal shit, but you know.
Indeed. But that's actually, going back to it, that's actually a good point. Even if you can't crowdfund it, I know a lot of these players who are on, you know, some of these contenders teams this season and this year were getting paid pretty well, actually, in order to compete in these rosters.
You can also live there pretty cheap, right?
What?
You can also live there pretty cheap if you just go
exactly.
Hotels, you pay for a day and that.
You don't have to live in a hotel. Just you can get like a fucking Airbnb or some shit and put all your computers in there. I ran boot camps in Korea where we just rented PCs. It's like, you could definitely, I mean, it would cost a few grand probably to live there, but if you're willing to live in, like, you know, a few people to a room, each having your own bed, of course, and then you just set up with PCs, it's definitely a possibility for a team on their own budget to go do that. And honestly, if I'm a team that is thinking about investing in Overwatch League next year, if I want to make a bid for future seasons and I want to start cultivating a roster now, why not just pay for it? Like for an org, it's really not expensive to send a team out there in the big picture to start developing that roster and prove that you will have a semi-strong roster when you start. I think it's a good idea for a bunch of the pro players from the West to go out there and try and compete.
Yeah, I mean, we have, I mean, even if they're not competing, we have teams coming to Korea. We have for all time to boot camp. And the original boot campers were the people living in the GOM TV, StarCraft StarCraft2 house, or no, even before then, the Westerners trying to get on Kesper Pro teams, living in Korea, trying to improve themselves so that not only they could participate in the OSL, but also if they played in their leagues back home. So, I mean, it's always going to be worth it until Korea's practice gets worse, which foreseeably is never going to happen. So,
yeah, because I mean, okay, Monty, I realize in general you seem to kind of like shading out the aspect of the idea that Apex could ever have the better teams than Overwatch League, because at the moment Overwatch League
it could happen.
Most of the talent. Sure, but one thing that I want to stress though that people won't realize who haven't come from other games is people will naively think, well, there's no need to worry, right? They've got all the best teams from Apex, and therefore they've got the best teams, and the Apex teams will be the ones below. I mean, history tells us Korea is it's like a hydra. You chop off any of the heads, it will just regenerate new heads. It will definitely be a team that comes from Apex in 6 months, a year, that might be the best team.
I mean, how could you even argue that right now when we just saw GC.Busan come out of nowhere and win the whole damn thing? Like, what if Overwatch League had already started and that had happened, and like GC.Busan actually is the best team in the world? You can't discount that. Now, I do think as Overwatch League expands, that'll be less likely to happen because as up and coming players emerge and the scene gets more professional, there will be talent scouts that'll be looking at these players well in advance and trying to sign them. So I just think that likelihood diminishes. And also the more teams there are that are pulling, all these top players, the less likely that is to happen. But I do think that there is a possibility in year one that there is a Korean team or two that is better than half the league at the very least.
Sure. I think that's in fact very likely. I think that we will definitely see these Royal Red or S teams appear for the next few seasons. Will we see the same level of play, that GC.Busan had and what they did to pass certain teams? I don't know if we'll ever know, even because if all these top tier teams going out, whenever someone's a Royal Red, what does it mean? I think it really hurts the not legitimacy of the league, but it hurts the stories of the league. And so, obviously talent scouts and people watching the league and casters and stuff will know, like, oh, this team is the best team in the world. When that happens, even if they beat the best teams in the world to be, you don't have to beat the best teams in the world to be the best team in the world. You just have to exhibit that type of skill, right? It's not an objective thing, but you could see, okay, this team looks like it has the potential to be one of the best Overwatch League teams, even though they didn't beat the Overwatch League teams while being in Apex. But I just feel like it's less interesting when you see new teams make runs like GC.Busan if they didn't defeat Legends and Champions. Yes. And if Legends and Champions are gone, then Apex becomes less interesting. It just becomes which Korean team of this season is going to get taken. But
I guess that's the same thing with any feeder league, right? We could say that about a AAA baseball team. It's like, yes, it does become less interesting, and it is about who are the prospects that are going to get signed. That's how these leagues work in sports.
Okay, Wolf, to transition this to talking again about top teams, not imaginary hypothetical teams that have not yet in fact occurred. One team that's very interesting, obviously, is when people heard that Lunatic-Hai was going to be signed in the West, initially it might have sounded a little bit depressing because you knew that they wouldn't take all the players. For example, Who Are You obviously could not go, who was a pretty studly player, if you remember a couple of seasons ago, was the MVP of the finals. But I actually think this is an example where, that case aside, this lineup looks even better because you know how I in every game, by the way, Wolf, I hate it when there's team games where people win. And because you won, people tell you, any player on that team, you are a champion. You are the best. And it's like, no, Lee Tae-jun, you were never the best for any second in your motherfucking life. You are not good. Good. Get out the team. I am glad you are not on the team. You were one of the reasons why they didn't win this season. Don't you actually think this Lunatic-Hai lineup looks better, Wolf?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, you have what you're talking about with the Munchkin and Fleta editions. Yeah. I think that they look good. I'm not sold on Zephyr yet.
I'm not either, but he must have look, they obviously did thorough tryouts. They've got a good coaching staff, so he must have displayed something in their tryout process.
Might be my guess is based on what we have not yet been able to see, even though we did see Zephyr play very briefly in that Soul Cup match. I must be something about like his ability to understand the game and shot call well, or maybe he's like a pseudo playing coach or something and makes a lot of decisions behind the scenes. But I think that Munchkin and Fleta looked incredible.
Plus wasn't Lunatic-Hai's DPS call fucking shady by the end?
It was the worst part of their run.
Taejun was, just to put this in perspective, Taejun was by a large margin. We're talking like, 1 to 2 is pretty similar, 2 to 3 is pretty similar as you go down. Then you go down to like 7 to 8, and like Taejun's 8. The distance between those is the largest, and he was like the bottom of the list in terms of KD. And Apex, like by far the worst of DPS players. Just putting it in the DPS sector there. And that's one of the reasons why MVP Space had such great success. With Yaki was a great Tracer player, and Taejun was just awful. And Eska has never been a consistent DPS. He's had his moments of brilliance, no doubt.
And he can only play one hero at like a professional level at a time too. So they sometimes they got stuck like using Sombra a lot of the time on attack, defense, no matter what, because of the way he was playing. So
I think that now that you have a player like Fleta who can play anything really well, any sort of DPS is fantastic. I love how we've seen even these Widowmaker Pharah comps work on Dorado, where you have the Widowmaker try to push members out of position, then Pharah is just left to do whatever she wants because she doesn't have to kill the DPSs in order to do damage to everything else, because the DPSs have to hide around corners because they're dealing with the Widowmaker at the same time. So Fleta in situations like that, because they play the Pharah quite well, the Widowmaker quite well, I think it's a really awesome pickup for them. Munchkin's Tracer play is just frankly, like, I think, even though he's only played like 1 day of televised matches on the roster, better than Lunatic-Hai's Tracer play has ever been at its peak. Like, I just don't think their Tracer play was ever very strong. Eska, mediocre Tracer player. Taejun, horrible Tracer player. Who are used Tracer, very mediocre as well. Comparatively, I think has the potential to be a great Tracer player, but he's not on the Soul team anymore, so not even worth talking about. He's too young to be on the
It is
roster.
sad that both him and Haksal are too young for the first season of Overwatch League, but it's the way it is.
So it is.
Flower is eligible halfway through the season, I believe, right? Oh no, he's not. No, he's not. He's actually. I think he can't play in the first season, but he's signed to the New York roster as far as I know.
Apparently, his birthday is May 14th.
I may be past the deadline. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But he is at least like part of that roster, I believe. So.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I was trying to look up his birthday right now, and I can't find it.
It said May 14th on... are you looking it up on a Korean site?
No, I was just looking at Wikipedia.
It said May 14th for Flower.
Okay. Just going back to the topic, I think that Team Soul looks a lot stronger with the DPSs added, and I think that if they had been on the team going into the season, I think they might have had a good chance of winning it. Again, we'll never know. I haven't seen those rosters clash yet, and got a different patch and things like that now with the Mercy changes. So I think the team is possibly like twice as good potentially as it was before.
Okay. So
they fixed the problem, and reminder that this is part of the professionalization of this team, and I think this was a necessary step in Lunatic-Hai's growth, because this was a team based off of the power of friendship, and somebody else from outside the org came in and offered them real contracts and real money. And at this point in time, they're like, oh shit, like we can't just keep doing this based on friendship roster anymore. We actually have to fix our problems. And certainly, if you look at that lineup, you wouldn't say that it's the tank and support elements that were really weak. It was definitely the DPS was the largest single problem on the team.
Sure. Well, put it this way: if me and you were picking the Overwatch Cup team for Korea, we'd take a few Lunatic-Hai players. Wouldn't take any of the other players. So that's kind of telling in itself, right? Even if we were putting together a fun team, no one would pick any of theirs.
I think it's really interesting that Miro was not picked for the team, obviously, and for me at the time, it was really shocking that he wasn't picked for the World Cup roster. And I thought, he's decent enough. He's decent enough to at least be considered. But talking to everyone, was saying like, no, I think Bear's got big problems with his Winston play, and that then later came out in the matches we're seeing now. And the DPS is being replaced doesn't fix his problem, but it makes it a lot easier to, if you're trying to in the middle of a season, try to figure out how to play Winston a little bit differently, like the other Korean teams are doing. Like right now, everyone's saying Winston is like the most important hero to fix how you play and like when you bubble. And Winston's a very understanding of a lot of different weird things type of hero. It's not about aim. It's not about dodging. It's not about making sure you put your bubble in the perfect place. It's like a plethora of things about where to jump, when to jump, hitting your melee correctly, and synergy, and bursting down other Winstons, when to primal rage, when to hold on to your primal rage, things like that. So advancing a Winston player is so difficult, but I think if you have good DPSs, at least it relieves a lot of the stress of the Winston, because those DPS players are killing the other Winston faster and things like that. So I think it'll make Miro stronger as a player too, as he kind of develops his next level of play.
So another team I think is fun to talk about is we now know that LW Blue, well, what the parts of it that didn't have to stay behind, will now be playing in Overwatch League for New York Excelsior. Now, what's great about that team, okay, is there's this whole sort of ambience around esports that's often plagued it, this stigma for many years. That's a bunch of nerds, you know, who are sat in the basement, you know, they play video games, they eat Cheetos, they play Dungeons and Dragons, they read comic books. So to get away from all of that, to make it feel like a sport, we're going to call our franchise Excelsior, a term, first of all, famously used by, like, I think they're actually, wasn't that actually something that even fucking Stan Lee used to say in the comics back in the day? I think he actually used to write that in his letter column or something. It's also just a famous nerd comment in general that no one in real life would ever say in any context. But actually, I don't even think the name's the funniest part. I think
it's the state motto of New York, by the way.
I think that logo is straight. Yeah, I don't care, mate. Do not care about New York whatsoever, except the burned over district, part of the cult revivals for many years in the 18th century. Look into it. Right, so that logo, though, is straight trash. That is like did Andy Warhol's corpse get reanimated and paid $2 million to make that logo? What the fuck are you doing? You better be telling me that's some sort of conceptual art or something, because if that was chosen for aesthetic reasons, all you managed to do was put the ass in aesthetic. Really well. I had to like bend the way I said that like a rapper, you know when a rapper can't really make a word rhyme and he changes the word a bit, and you're like, yeah, I guess that sort of passes, but couldn't you really have done a second take? And he's like, nah, pay me that money, son, which probably is what the designer of this said.
Hey, I find most of your humor is like hammering that square peg through the round hole, so I think it fits.
Well, that's in many ways our relationship as well. So anyway, keep going. Come on, Wolf.
Go on.
No, come on. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say the logo. It's supposed to. It's something animated like white and blue, and like it's like arrows coming into each other. I don't know how to describe it. Like, arrows moving inwards like this, right? And then they just like paused it in the middle of the animation, and it's like not supposed to be like stationary, but it is. It doesn't look like an X to me. It looks like it's something that's frozen, some optical illusion.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. I feel like it's more like the sort of shit that they show you on the goggles that they jam onto you when you're in the MK Ultra program and you're dosed up with LSD. And then your mission, like any minute now, as a sleeper agent, you wake up and you complete your mission, whatever that may indeed be.
So I guess maybe what people say is, like, I guess if you look at it the right way, you can see what the logo is supposed to be, because it's an optical illusion, and everyone's going to be looking at it, trying to figure out why the logo is.
It's actually sick, though. It's actually really sick. It's like 3D. It comes out and everything, and like moves.
So I don't even mind the Excelsior name that much. What I really hate is that they changed their Twitter like NYXL. Yeah. And come on, dude, you're running a pro gaming team and you don't think the first thing everybody's going to be doing is making fat jokes about your fucking team? Like, why in the hell would you try and abridge it to XL? That is just terrible branding. Awful.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, that is mainly the t-shirt size they're probably going to be selling to a lot of the fans. So there's layers to this shit,
So I know you were talking about this, Monty. I don't have as much of a problem with it myself, but didn't they also announce they're going to have player numbers on the back of their jerseys?
Look, you want me to go off on a rant about this shit? It's just so stupid. Okay, so first off, let's start with the fact that you even have jerseys. Why the fuck is that even necessary? Think about all the cool shit you can do with uniforms that aren't jerseys. You know what I did with Renegades? I didn't make fucking jerseys. I made embroidered motorcycle jackets, and they were way sicker than most regular jerseys, right? Yeah. So they're not actually doing anything physical. They don't need the breathable fabric. Be more fucking creative than jerseys. So first off,
but here's the thing. The number part is genius, because think about what the point of numbers in sports are. Because you can't always see the player, so you can say, "Oh, it's 66. He's going in for the goal." Well, yeah, but he's not in the server with the 66. That would never help you as a commentator, would it?
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So go to the point. What is the point of having numbers on jerseys? It's because from a distance, when you're watching the game, when I watch the NFL, I know which player on the Broncos, when I'm watching a Broncos game, is making the play, because I know what number they are, because I have it memorized. They serve multiple functions. So from far away, You could actually tell which player is which. At least in the NFL, numbers, so like number ranges tell you which position that player is playing, right?
It used to be similar in football as well, yeah.
Yeah, so that's also helpful if you like don't know that guy and you're like, what position is that guy playing? Generally speaking, you can figure it out. For officiating, if I'm a ref, I don't want to have to memorize like the 53-man rosters of every fucking NFL team, of 32 NFL teams. I need to go to game every week and just throw a flag and say, you know, offsides on number 80, right? Like, it just makes sense on so many levels. If there were numbers on the Overwatch players in the server, like we saw in CGS, that might make more sense. But even then, we're not dealing with like dozens of people on one roster. It's not that fucking hard to figure out who the
let's also talk about.
There's one or maybe two on the team.
The numbers are on the back of the jersey. The back of the jersey is facing a chair.
If it was the same in the server, okay, maybe I can possibly understand that, even though I think it's unnecessary because we don't have dozens of players on every single roster. But you don't have any, there's no point. Like Wolf says, it's facing the chair. And everybody's like, well, it's cool. I'm like, yeah, but think about all that space on the uniform that everybody else is too shitty to do something even more cool with, right? You're just wasting it with these numbers that mean fuck all nothing. It's a terrible, I just hate how more and more teams are starting to do this because people are like, oh, I like it. It's like sports. I'm like, but it serves no purpose. And you don't even know. You might like something else even better if they tried to be creative for 2 seconds about how they were doing their uniforms.
Well, I think people trying to find, whenever I hear things like, oh, it's cool, it's like sports, I'm like, well, it doesn't need to be like sports anyways. Like, this is esports, but like, if the reason why you are kind of getting into this thing is because it's kind of like another thing you like, then I don't know if you really like it. You know what I mean? You want it to be like the other thing that you like, but it isn't that thing. It's not, you know, a player smacking a ball physically.
I just love them saying that also to the current esports crowd. It's just like sports. You mean that thing we all tried to get away from on fucking computers because we weren't interested in sports, which, by the way, are better at being sports than esports. Therefore, logically, we are not the demographic to say that to. We actually hate sports, and you know, get out. What the fuck?
That's the funniest shit when people say that.
So, okay, here's the question.
Look, I've talked to many owners about this, and besides the owners that are already doing this in esports, and I can think of North does it, FaZe does it, Misfits do it. But besides from, there might be a couple other teams, but besides those owners, every other owner that I've talked to fucking hates this. They hate it. They think it's unnecessary. And from their perspective, too, it's taking up space that they could use for sponsors or, like I said, for doing other cool shit. And here's the thing, too. Riot they forced the owners to move to jerseys. I don't even understand that. Again, why does it have to be jerseys? Why can't it just be hoodies like Cloud9 had before, t-shirts and hoodies? Why do you have to wear jerseys? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. Just
why can't it be this more creative? Why can't it be the spacesuits that were at the OSL the opening season?
Those were sick. At least they took care of the OSL spacesuits, man. Those were great.
Why does it even have to be clothes at all? Why not just heat the studio to perfectly body temperature and then allow people to play naked? And maybe, like an isolation tank, we will learn that actually you use like 1% of your consciousness just feeling your clothes on you at all times. And if you free that up, you might get even sicker with Widowmaker. You might be able to hit an extra pixel. Listen, my nudist team would fucking body all the other teams.
Nothing I want to see more than Taimu naked. Just nothing in the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, funnily enough, people might actually be able to then use his own jokes from Twitch chat, but in an appropriate manner. So there we go. The circle's complete. So, okay, pulling back from our hot take segment regarding a logo and clothes, this actual team must be one that you are incredibly excited for, Monty, because first of all, you already liked LW Blue, and now they have, the key part people have missed out on is they've got Libero into the team.
And I love Libero. I know, it's like if I made a team.
Looks like a pretty good team.
I do love LW Blue, and I'm happy that at least while they don't have Flower, assuming that he does go onto this roster eventually once he becomes of age. Look, I think Libero is just a great player. Great flexibility, amazingly deep.
Formerly of Meta Athena, obviously.
Yeah, he reminds me of, he's like Korean Tavik. It's just like he's like a multi-tool, right? He's like a Swiss Army knife you can put in any situation. I just really like watching him play.
Yeah, he's like kind of like a Fleta as well in a lot of different ways. Like just maybe not as quite as high skill, I'd say at this point. Like I think he's going to find his more niche position eventually, but like in times where changing metas are going on or new patches are coming out, you want to have somebody like that in your roster that can start because they know how to play the weird shit before everyone else figures it out.
So what about LW Blue?
I really like him. Like he's not going to be the star player, but what he does do is he adds so much flexibility to your roster and allows your star players to really shine because he can change to whichever hero or whichever composition enables your really big star player. So I love him as a player.
And he no longer has to just play with a Zarya every single game.
That's true.
He's no longer forced to do that. So, okay, here's the question, though. The thing about LW Blue is people who don't watch Apex will probably not really understand them as a team because every season of Apex, they're in that conversation of like, oh, could this be the season where they win, where they show all the potential, but they never actually managed to do it. So what's your like verdict on what the problems were when they were an Apex team?
I mean, I think that they just didn't understand the metas as well as the other teams. They were plagued with a lot of other problems, like Season 4, they just simply didn't play in the league. Season 3, Jonas had problems with his lungs. He had a collapsed lung problem. So we never got to see the full roster there. Then there was another problem with one of the players. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head who couldn't play. So Pine had to sub in, and Pine was, he's obviously a very good player, but he's not at the same level. I think it was Sabilbo who could play for like a brief period of time. So Pine was subbing for him and just not on the same level. So you have these, they're plagued by a lot of problems with their roster and things like that, but I don't think they were adapted really quickly.
As they made changes to that roster too, like, okay, so they pick up Mono, but we didn't get to fucking see that. You know what I mean? So I think Mono's a great player, and I would have loved to have seen how he did after being on Africa, but we didn't even get to watch that because they just dropped out of the league. So
yeah. They picked up Arc as well, and I think Arc is a very underrated Lucio player. We'll see what he ends up playing, but I assume he'll be playing support, you have to imagine. I think this team will probably be the weakest Korean team going into this tournament, like Korean roster, because first of all, they wouldn't play Season 4 of Apex, so they weren't in that rigorous training environment like the other two teams, the two major ones, Seoul, of course, and London. So I think that this has happened in esports for like all time, and it will happen to the Overwatch League teams as well, which is why another reason why the champions will keep getting pulled from Apex, because when you move away from Korea, you move to America, and you don't have that practice environment that you're used to. Koreans have always historically gotten worse over time after moving to the home states. Play players like MC, MVP, StarCraft2 players, League of Legends players that have gone overseas, Brood War players that have like gone to overseas temporarily, things like that. You just always end up getting worse. But the main reason why is you're not practicing in that rigorous environment that you were before in Korea. And because this team did not play Season 4 for one reason or another, they lost their edge. I think that's already lost. Like, you can't argue that they were practicing just as hard as the teams that played in Season 4. Just think there's no argument for that. And so therefore they're kind of one step behind. Maybe they figure the meta out faster than everybody else, but I don't have faith that the team can do that.
Because Wolf, you have to understand, they're the control group in this scenario. We know the other Koreans are fucking amazing, so we expect them to do really well. If this team does really well, then and beats out the Western teams, now you know the West's in trouble. Like
yeah, that's true. I mean, they always were a top team, though, so I don't think it's I think that they're going to stay in Korea probably up until very soon, close to when the league starts, and they'll be practicing. So I wouldn't necessarily panic just yet. And also, in regards to your other point about how practice gets worse, one of the really interesting things that I'm looking forward to with Overwatch League is because there are going to be so many Korean players. We could say, okay, but the solo queue practice gets worse. The practice outside of the scrim environment, which traditionally has been true in other games. But remember that all of these teams are going to be on a set scrim schedule. So when there are going to be blocks of time where everybody's scrimming, and there's going to be blocks of time outside of those, because usually what happens in esports is that teams will have a scrim block schedule where they scrim the same times. All the teams scrim at the same time 6 days a week or whatever. So outside of that, inside of those times, they're not playing on the ladder. But outside of that, there's no reason to believe that all of these players won't be playing on the solo queue ladder. And I think we have to think about that there's going to be a minimum of 100, we can say, there's 12 teams. Let's say each one let's just say bare minimum of 100, considering 12 teams can have 12-person rosters. All of these teams are going to be living in Los Angeles for the duration of the season. All of them will be practicing in solo queue at approximately the same times. So when these players are queuing up in solo queue, in theory, that should give them a much better practice environment because there's so many of them, and there are also going to be so many full Korean rosters and Korean players in this league. Is that the question is, previously, because you couldn't have in League of Legends, let's say, you can only have 2 Korean players on your roster, which isn't enough, I think, to really affect the high levels of solo queue. But when there's 50 maybe Koreans, let's say 40 within this environment, and they're all going to be playing solo queue at the same time, and we know they're all great players, is the practice environment necessarily going to be bad at the level of solo queue or competitive queue that they are playing, right? It's just it might be that it is, right? I don't know, but I'm intrigued to see if that's going to drag up the quality of practice even when they're not in scrims.
That's really exciting about what's going to happen in Overwatch League, and in new esports usually, like League of Legends, for example, just recently over the past few years have had real team houses and things like that, and they have an actual physical studio to play in the West. Until recently, it was only Korea that had that team house environment and had the rigorous practice schedules. As you say, we're going to have a lot of Koreans for this league, and all of these teams, all of them, obviously we know, are very well funded, so it's not a matter of budget to get a house made and put these guys in a team house and have them have those scrim schedules. Not only just the schedule and the time right, but not playing from 6 different houses, playing together in that house. We would imagine we'll probably see team houses built and things like this to prepare and train even in the off season. So,
well, here's the other thing too, is that most of the teams are going to be actually having their central practice facility in the studio. So right now what's happening is that there are rooms being built out, and teams can have their own facility if they want, but as far as I understand it, almost all of the teams have already said that they want to have their practice facility in the studio. So they'll live elsewhere, but they will be in Burbank every day for their practice, which means also that there's probably going to be, in-house just pickup games between players because they're going to be all in like the same building. So I think that this is an opportunity. Traditionally, it has been like the longer Korean players are away from Korea that they do decrease in skill. They atrophy. But is that going to be the case in this particular environment, considering there are going to be more of them out here than in any other game previously, and therefore they'll be able to get better practice against each other? Maybe it will lessen that decline.
Yeah,
also,
I agree.
Also, it's important to note that the Overwatch League season is going to be, it's not going to run all year long, right? So a lot of these players are going to be back in Korea for an extended period of time during the off season. And I think that will probably also help them recharge their batteries a bit. It's not like in League of Legends where if you're assigned to a North American roster, you literally live in America like 11 months out of the year.
I mean, I think personally, just going into this, I mean, again, I could be wrong, but I think the most likely thing is that they will lose a significant amount of skill, even with all those things you said. But I think without those things you just mentioned, it would be massive eventually, right? Like the Apex team that won Season 4, GC.Busan in this case, versus the 2018, Season 14, if there are 4 seasons in a year. I think the skill level would be very different because of that lack of time spent in Korea. Now I don't think it will be none, but I think there will still be a decline. But yeah, I think because of the things you just said, the atrophy will happen slower and will be less massive, I guess.
Sure. I mean, one of the things, if you notice, even to this day in games like StarCraft, which obviously is a massively professionalized esport, the route by which you can get new players into teams is still incredible in Korea. Like, they purposely put as few barriers as possible. So really, if you do have a guy who's like struggling, who was a good player for you, 6 months ago, you will just have a sub guy who you've picked up that no one's ever seen play in competitive play before, who might have come straight from solo queue or some challenger and then he's just into the team, Whereas obviously you won't really have that in the same way in Overwatch League because everyone's signed the players in a very different manner, and it'd take more time to get the subs in the same way. You can't just literally get a guy like this guy's amazing right now from solo queue and bring him right into your team, at least as far as we know. I mean, as you say, no one really knows what the transfer scenario is, right?
Yeah, and also I just think if you're smart, there's also other things that teams can do to mitigate this a bit. If I was New York or I was Seoul, the first thing I would do is I would create a Korean gaming house and run an Apex team as a minor league team. And then if I need to move players up and down between these two rosters and I can keep my scouting up, I would 100% do that. If it was my plan,
I mean, wouldn't that make more sense for some of them?
Koreans?
Yeah, if you have an all-Korean team, wouldn't that make more sense than having a contenders team?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would totally do that if I was planning. If my long-term vision was to run an all-Korean roster, and we don't know if that's necessarily true about New York, but obviously it is for Seoul. You imagine it's true for New York, and based on rumors for London as well, that they're going to continue to run these all-Korean rosters. If that's the case, then I immediately create a B team and put them at Apex and start developing that talent. And that way, if in Apex, in the situation that we were talking about earlier, where one of these teams gets super good, I have a choice of either selling that roster to or selling players to other teams, because I just proved that they're super good. I'm going to make mint off of those player buyout fees. Or I can just, this player's underperforming. Maybe this guy just needs a break and needs to go back to Korea for a while. Just move him up, move him down, whatever.
I think that's a fantastic plan, and I do hope that other teams do that. I mean, we don't know what will happen to the second Lunatic-Hai team, obviously, that was not sent into Overwatch League with Team Seoul. So
good players on that.
I mean, that's a team that, if ends up getting picked up by the Team Seoul organization, will possibly be able to be kind of one of those situations. So this thing, we don't know, but this could literally be happening right now as we speak for Team Seoul, at least.
What do you think, Monty, about like a very, very recent piece of news as at the time of this recording is that Nevix has actually been added to the San Francisco Shock lineup? And obviously he is a player where I would say has had a kind of a little bit of a tortured career, because he obviously was on Misfits for a while. That was during one of their worst periods, though. If you look at the team, that was one of the players who some people pointed out maybe he didn't fit with the lineup very well. He's been in a bunch of different teams now. What do you think about him being added to the Shock lineup?
Let me just go ahead and pull up the entire Shock lineup real quick.
That's the one with IDD Kudri, Sinatra, who obviously can't play initially, Bebe, Nomi, Sleepy, Dante, Super. I mean,
this is definitely like a development roster. I think actually they made some smart signings. I think getting Sinatra is huge because that guy's really a world-class player. And also Super is very good, but both of these players are too young right now in order to compete. Also, from talking to the ownership over at the Shock, Super actually takes over a lot of the shot calling when he scrims with them, but again, he's not going to be eligible. So I think right now it's mostly about them waiting for their players in order to get good. I think on C9, Nevix was actually doing much better than I thought he would towards the end of the season, given, like you say, that he has had a bit of an up and down performance. He's been inconsistent. When he was at his best, I thought he was a great May player, super underrated. And then he sort of fell apart on that Misfits roster and wasn't actually very good either as an individual or in terms of coordinating with his team. But then he brought it back up again with C9. So I'm not sure what's going on with Nevix because he's just been oscillating so wildly in terms of his performance. But I think he'll be a good placeholder for the time being, and we'll just have to wait until some of these other players come of age, because I think the Shock will be good or will improve a lot between season 1 and season 2, even if their initial performance isn't that strong. But they have some really good pieces, and they have some of the best, I think, up and coming Western players in Sinatra and Super. So I'm more excited to see what they do down the line than I am in season 1.
Okay. Right. Should we talk about Overwatch World Cup?
Sure.
Discuss that, because I actually think one aspect, here's one storyline that hasn't been played up enough about the Overwatch World Cup, Monty, is that this is sort of the last ride of Rogue.
Yep.
Yeah. This is it. So that listen, by the way, unfortunately, I will give you a spoiler, right? Just based on the little that I know of a couple of the players in this team and some people who happen to also come from the country of France, right? If this was a movie and these were Americans, this would be, the Charge of the Light Brigade. It'd be like the last ever run. But unfortunately, this is where I could see some of these French individuals being like, we didn't even practice, don't care anymore. It's bullshit. We should have been in Overwatch League. It's bullshit, isn't it? It's like, I could unfortunately see them going out with a whimper. You know,
I think that's definitely possible.
I don't know which way it's going to go yet, so I hope it goes well. Because I hope it's some like epic last run, you know.
It's unfortunate they have the bracket they do, because they're going to face off against China first, which was in they played in the same qualifier, the Shanghai qualifier, but didn't actually face against each other there. So that was a very exciting thing that, you know, they do finally get to meet each other, because they both were clearly the best teams in Shanghai. And I think China was by far the strongest team in that qualifier. I think much better than France at the time with the roster they have, which is crazy considering they're, you know, they're not actually a full pro gamer team. They have some, you know, players from two teams basically, mostly LGD, but that, you know, what was once called LGD, I should say. And then France obviously being fully rogue. If they can beat China, which I, at this moment in time, based on what I've seen from them or what I saw from them even back then, I don't think that they will. But if they do, they will likely face South Korea, not North Korea, not in this tournament. South Korea, who will, you know, is of course very favored to beat the United States. So then that's it. Like, there's no finals bracket run. If they were on the other side of the bracket with teams like the UK, Canada, Australia, I think this team has a chance to go far. Well, they have a really, really tough bracket, so I just don't think it is going to be the Disney movie that the fans want.
Just as a note, when you were saying there about China, you have to remember, like, actually it turned out half those players couldn't get their visas, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 4 new players on that roster.
Okay, I didn't know that, actually. My bad.
Yeah, but it's a couple miraculous youngster players and stuff came in. So arguably China has a better team now.
Wait, let me look
for
at
this
this
meta.
Yeah.
We've got... Okay, you still have Eileen, who I think was their best player, but
Great
you
name,
lost
by the way.
Viking.
Fantastic name for a professional player.
You have Yao Yao, who's a former Heroes of the Storm player, really good player.
And then everybody else got changed.
Yeah, I mean, Leave and Jufan Jun are like possibly better than the players I had before. I think I can't say the synergy on this roster is going to be great. I mean, there's no way to prove that, but in terms of raw talent, I think this roster is still quite strong. But yeah, I guess it won't be necessarily as easy for France to win that matchup. That makes it more exciting.
Well, also, we have to remember that it's not like Rogue has been practicing together either, because a lot of these guys have been doing Overwatch League tryouts and preparing for their futures. So we'll hope that France has been practicing at least in the last couple of weeks for the World Cup. I agree with Thorin. Like, I hope they've been practicing. I hope they see this as an opportunity to maybe make their case for last-minute Overwatch League signings, or at least to be substitute players or on contenders teams. And if it was the American mentality, maybe it might be different, but it also might be them just resigning themselves to their existential angst and going to drink wine and smoke cigarettes. So like, I don't know what their motivation level is right now. So I hope it's good.
Yeah. Like, basically, I'm just worried that the level of ennui in that team will just destroy it before it even begins. You know? So, okay, here's the question though, Monty. Actually, in general, no one's really addressed this. Okay, so as actually Wins addressed when I did my video interview with him, because I just basically straight up asked him, why is this entire Rogue squad not just in Overwatch League as an entire squad? And he basically says because the buyouts for all the players were just higher than most teams were willing to pay, and therefore no one wanted to buy the entire squad. Now, okay, I can get that perspective, as we've addressed already when we've hinted at some of the other teams that aren't, like, you know, the top Korean teams. Maybe some teams aren't spending a massive budget on the first season and they want to see where the kind of lay of the land is. But with that said, okay, admittedly at the time of this recording, not all signings are known. A couple of people still might get in. Some of the players on Rogue that at the moment, as far as I know, are not on teams, some of them are a little bit shocking. Aren't you a little bit surprised at some of these? Well,
it's been rumored that Soon and Unco went to Immortals, which I think is great for Immortals, if that's true, or Valiant. They haven't announced their roster yet. I think that it is surprising to me that neither Nox nor AKM has been picked up. It is less surprising to me that Nico and Wins have not been picked up. I think Nox is a very cerebral. I think he's an intelligent player, so he could, and he's older as well. I think he could serve as sort of the shot calling or heart of a team, really. And AKM obviously has exceptional mechanical skills, so I think even Wins probably might be a decent strategy coach or analyst or something like that, given how long his pro FPS career has been. So I have a feeling that a lot of these players are going to find homes, and that I wouldn't despair too much yet. I do think it is a bit unbelievable, in particular, that AKM hasn't been picked up, but You know, they may have signed contracts with very large buyout clauses or indeterminate buyout clauses where Rogue as an organization can set the buyout clause at whatever they want. Obviously, we haven't seen the contracts. And if that's true, what Wins is saying, which we don't know, so let's not go on a witch hunt over Rogue. But there have been other teams that have been rumored to have these same issues, such as FaZe. Why haven't we seen any of the FaZe guys picked up? Like, it's clearly a good team, right? We wouldn't call them a top 5 team, but I think FaZe is probably like a top 12 team in the world. So you'd think good enough to be an Overwatch league,
being
right?
Westerners, right? So in theory, you want some of these players.
Yeah, FaZe has good players.
I mean, I think if they play the long game and continue to play whether contenders or whatever, they either become coaches or managers, staffs, whatever, of some type, right? Or when you talk about future Overwatch League teams being added to the league, Paris will always be a city that's very much considered for this. So, I mean, this is a French team, and all of these players might not stay together, but if they do, I mean, there's so much they could do with that. But, I mean, I think that, like, even though it feels kind of doom and gloom that they didn't get necessarily on teams as far as we know, it doesn't mean that it's the end, because this is just the first season. And there's going to be many more seasons. There are going to be many more teams added, you know, throughout this league's history. So,
and France fields very strong FPS rosters in a variety of games, and we know the French are world class. Like, look at also think about Gamers Origin, which was another all-French roster that was in contenders that came out of nowhere and surprised a lot of people. I think that if there's a Parisian team and they have a combination of Rogue and Gamers Origin, that becomes a very good team almost instantly. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these guys. Definitely, we're going to see some of them in Overwatch League in Season 1, but I feel for them because it seems like a tough situation, but I think they just need to stay the course and stick it out, because they will be eventually rewarded, I think. Or even, like, let's say, again, this is one of those scenarios where, let's say somebody's hit scan, you know, their soldier player is underperforming halfway through the season. The first person you're going to go to is AKM to fill that role if you need to make an emergency pickup. So might take a little longer than he wants, but I think that there's probably a good opportunity for him moving forward. He's still a very good player.
Okay. So one of the things about this tournament, obviously, and something we addressed on past episodes, is that the bottom part of the bracket ended up pretty stacked. But as such, the positive of that is it means the top part of the bracket's pretty wide open, right? So, Monty, what are the chances that the UK could beat Sweden? Because both interesting lineups, right? I mean, UK has a bunch of players we've seen in teams.
Yeah, I think decent, actually. Although what we have seen with Sweden is that they've changed their roster, right? Moving into this. So they removed Reinforced and they added Snillo and then moved Swoosh to that tank role. So it's still mostly misfits, right? It's a misfits with Chipsyon and Snillo. And so they already have that natural synergy. And I think that given how Misfits was playing in contenders, that I think they're probably pretty comfortable favorites at this point in time. Most of Sweden's problems in the group stage for the World Cup came from the fact that they were not synergizing very well around Swoosh's Dragon Blade engages, and their ult economy was a bit shaky. But I think now that Swoosh is on tank, and we'll probably see Tvik playing the Genji instead, it'll probably normalize, and I think it'll be a stronger roster. So UK might have a shot, but I'd still tip it to Sweden.
What do you think, Wolf?
I mean, it's tough to say. I think that I honestly, like, I just think the players on Sweden are overall better, right? So I think it's going to come down to, does United Kingdom have like some sort of crazy good practice leading up to this? And can they have this incredible performance in, you know, what is it, it's the best of 4 system again, or what? And then, no, is it best of 5? I don't actually know. I'm not casting this tournament, but best of 5. Okay, so if they have this incredible best of 5, I guess anything could happen, right? But I mean, I think the safe bet is Sweden. They have the stronger lineup and have more pro gamers, like real active pro gamers in their lineup. So it's almost completely Misfits. You know, it's almost completely a pro gaming team, and that's just always been, for every team that's done well, especially in qualifiers, that's always been the more successful teams. Was it maybe China and France won't get out in Shanghai, as some people said that, but they got out with flying colors easily, China not dropping a single map. So, you know, it's tough to say for certainty, but I think kind of lean towards what Monte was saying.
Okay. And then the other matchup, we have Canada, where obviously a bunch of those players are known, and some of them are going in Overwatch leagues, a bunch of them have been in a number of teams. But then you have the Australia lineup, which were actually like a shock to get out of that qualifier. They were in a qualifier that, remember, had Finland and Spain, and they got out along with, I think they were in Sweden's qualifier, weren't they?
Yes.
It was a signature qualifier. So what are Australia's chances like versus the much bigger names of Canada?
I mean, I feel pretty good about Australia. Remember that they continue to compete in Southeast Asia on LAN, and they were recently at Apex and managed to take out, one of the Taiwanese teams and make the top 8 and one of the Chinese teams. So this is still a roster that has continued to play all as a unit, and I think that means that they've got a really good shot. And again, a lot of these Canadian players will have been practicing with their Overwatch League teams and not necessarily together for this event, but Australia continues just to have more and more and more practice together. So
yeah, I think that the fact that you have this full roster that's focused on this and other tournaments as like a 6-man group gives them a large edge. And I think Australia's performance at the qualifier, sure, I mean, it's a long time ago now, was pretty stellar, right? The series with Japan, really fun series to watch, really exciting one. And I think that there's something about this roster to me that speaks like momentum, crowds, and this is going to be a huge crowd for BlizzCon. I kind of lean towards Australia here, honestly. I think it means a lot to them, and they're very proud of being Australia and things like that. Like this seems like the tournament for this team, if that makes sense. Like, would this team do well in like Overwatch League if you just ported it in? Like, no, I don't think so. But if you put this team on this, roster on a world stage where it's about this is for Australia, I just get this feeling, which isn't based on really anything but what I've seen so far, not logic or gameplay, just based on momentum-based play styles and how they get hyped in front of the crowd and things like that.
So it is worth noting that they did make one change before they started their latest season and then their APAC run, which is that they're running a New Zealand player now, Huwu, which we saw in the New Zealand World Cup team. So they're bringing back Atar, looks like, who is the person who was cut for him for the actual World Cup. But still, they have a lot of synergy. There's still 5 out of 6 of them are going to be playing. So I would tip them to make it in, honestly, just because they've been in such consistent competition recently and traveling a lot and performing pretty decently on a global stage. So I think that they have a pretty good chance of beating Canada.
Okay. I actually have because one thing that I find interesting about that, just as kind of like a side note, is I'm actually kind of underwhelmed by Sweden in Overwatch, just generally, because when they had obviously like the core of that team, I mean, you had a couple of them over on the Rogue squad, and then the rest of them were misfits, and then they made that roster transfer where they made the all-Swedish lineup. Like, I totally could get why they did that, because historically, the best Swedish teams in FPS games, they all are Swedish. They're one of the only nations that doesn't generally take in outsiders, and one of the things is, in Counter-Strike especially, and Quake actually, by the way, they always had, if not the best team was from Sweden, always at the very least elite level teams were from Sweden. You know, they've never had teams that were outside of contention. But I have to say, if you asked me the reasons why players from Sweden were very good in Quake and Counter-Strike, I actually would say, to me, the main quality that was always their strength was team play. Like, they seem to be very good at sort of people understanding not to be too egotistical if you're like the star player, for example. Like, you kind of still have to work with someone who perhaps is a more supportive player in order to be facilitated to be the star. You know, they can tend to understand that quality. But I have to say, when I look at those other games, Quake, Counter-Strike, Sweden was never the best at strategy. They would just find a strategy that worked for their style. They were never the ones that had the best tactics or really in-depth set plays, you know? So I wondered, actually, I wanted to get your take on this as kind of a theory craft, because in Overwatch, it does feel like strategy and being able to kind of reverse engineer the current meta is a massive quality in winning, right? It's not just about having an amazing player and saying, oh, I'm just going to defy the meta entirely and play my style. And it seems that you won't be the best if you do that, right?
I mean, I agree. Like, you look at Counter-Strike, for example, and theoretically one person could, if played perfectly, kill 6 people, whereas in Overwatch that's just not really possible.
Unless they killed themselves as well.
Right.
They could kill themselves right after they did the fight.
I'm just saying, if you had 6 in Counter-Strike, like Overwatch, right? I mean, if it was the same sort of 12-player game, then yeah, you could see like, okay, that sort of I'm better than everybody else kind of mentality. But in Overwatch, yeah, I would agree that because it's more strategy based, it's more team fight based more than like aim based, even though aim is a big part of it. Yeah, you would think that style would make them good. And I think it's funny because it's too early to tell to me. Like, I think Overwatch is so early that we can't really start to draw conclusions about like whether Sweden is is weak or not yet. I mean, they've produced some really good players, some famous players as well. Reinforce himself, like considered one of the top players last year. Now, has moved into kind of like a semi-pro, semi-analyst role. But,
Tavik is still also definitely in the conversation for among the best players in the world. So
true.
But I what's interesting to me is that you have sort of these Scandinavian flavors and all these different esports, because in League of Legends, at least, Sweden was never really like a powerhouse. Yes. It was Denmark, right? Is really like the Scandinavian country. But what's interesting to me about Overwatch is that for whatever reason, there are a bunch of really good Finnish players. Yes. And I don't really know any other esport that has had such a huge amount of quality Finnish players as Overwatch has.
What's bizarre is Finland in general. Like, here's the thing. In Counter-Strike, they definitely did have some good teams. It's just, first of all, they were always limited by that. Like, they have the same as South Korea. You have to go and do the military, and you can put it off. But just like with South Korea, you only put it off your military service if you're really good at the game. So it meant that, like, a lot of people did put it off, but it meant inevitably it was going to come for you. So that did hack away at the Counter-Strike talent. The only other game that Finland's ever been good at, basically, is actually the first Quake World. Like, in that, they always had some very good teams, but a weird quality they had in that game, actually, in which the NIP team in Overwatch reminds me of, is that generally they would just keep the exact same core of players. They would never change anyone. And it would be kind of that logic of like, well, because it's almost like Virtus Pro do in CSGO. Because we're never going to change players, right? It's going to be hard to be number one doing that, because obviously you can't just put in the hot new player and be number one, But you also will, in theory, if you had a good core, get to like an unparalleled level of like team play. You will literally know inside out what your teammate will do and then what he should do next. And so you can kind of... It's kind of, you're playing the long game when you do that, So that's why I've actually been wondering what would happen to this team that now is like Gigante or whatever they were called, the former NIP squad, because they certainly were very stubborn in that respect, right? They kept the same core and they refused to change how they played, right?
I mean, they did make a bunch of swap outs, right, eventually, but it is fun though that they found other good Finnish players to replace those Finnish players that they lost too, right? So I think it's fun to see how Finland's doing. I think Finland, we're going to continue to see more and more great Finnish players. Like, I mean, obviously we see Taimu and Linkser. Like, Taimu's definitely in. It'd be a shame if Linkser was not in the Overwatch League. I think Zappis is a great leader and like also had some really clutch plays in the finals for Gigante. So, and Fraggy also. I think that these guys, I have more faith in their stability in a lot of ways than the Swedish roster. Obviously, Misfits came up short in contenders. It just seems to me that if not that Sweden isn't going to be good in the long run, we're not going to see a lot of Swedish players. I just think that maybe Finland is actually going to be like the Scandinavian story of Overwatch.
Okay. Because that's one thing I wanted to ask you, actually, is because at least from the what I've seen so far, it does feel like read on the meta is more so than any game I've ever seen, like a primary factor in winning. Like, here's the thing. It obviously exists in every game. But the difference is, in other games, you actually have players who sometimes just ignore the meta entirely. Like, Wolf, you come from StarCraft2. Certain players who were fantastic players will just play their style. Like, a classic one I'll give you, okay, StarCraft2 one is 4GG. Right, 4GG continued to play like 2 years after his style even worked, the same style basically, and then you could tell in his mind he was just thinking, oh, I was just a bit unlucky in that game, or I didn't quite, and it's like, well, no, people know your style, dude, like that doesn't work anymore. But he would keep doing it, and he would think that skill could power your way through. But you go to Overwatch and it does feel like coaching must have a massive role in that game, if it doesn't already.
I mean,
I feel like that has to be the future.
I mean, we have tactical pauses in Apex where a coach can actually basically do what in traditional sports is like a timeout. Yes. Call this timeout. You have 3 minutes to talk to the players, and I mean the fact that it exists.
Like, dude, imagine if that existed in League of Legends, Monty. Like, that alone would have fixed so many teams. It's unbelievable. Like, if you could have a timeout and tell them, what the fuck are you doing with this rotation? Go back to the lane, push this tower in. Like,
well, okay, to be fair, this happens in between maps.
Yeah, in between maps. It's not like actually...
Coaches can, in League of Legends, talk to the players in between maps, so it's somewhat...
Sure.
Yeah, but, you know, in Overwatch, you have this ability to pause, talk to the coach, rethink compositions in between maps, as Monty said. In Korea, the most respected coach right now is the Lunatic-Hai coach, OverSight. Some really similar ID to I Love You, actually, also on the coach, so it's kind of funny. Yeah. And like, you know, I know like every time it's on the subreddit when like whenever you OverSight says like 2 words, it's like TIS Robin like translates it, and it's on Reddit. Yeah. But the reason why he posts it is because the Korean committee really thinks strongly of the words that he says and like things that he'll occasionally say on stream. And he's considered to be very intelligent, right? He's coached a 2-time Apex championship team. And, you know, obviously his coaching does work. And we've had a lot of coaches come and go throughout Korean Overwatch. A lot of them actually former Heroes of the Storm coaches. Like MVP Space's coach was a Heroes of the Storm coach. For a while, NCO's coach was a Heroes of the Storm player who then became a Heroes of the Storm coach, and then finally Overwatch coach. So coaching, I think, is a huge factor. You have to be able to schedule scrims and figure out a style. And it's tough because in Apex especially, but in Overwatch esports right now in general, who knows what's happening in the future, you play tournaments on old patches for so long that what you're practicing in solo queue is so irrelevant to what you actually have to play for a tournament. So your coach has to then figure out what's in your mind, what you're like watching your solo queue games, what you're focusing on, and tell you how to adjust it going back to an older patch. It's kind of a weird thing, especially in Apex, where we're talking like a month and a half after a patch comes out, we're still playing the old patch. So I think coaching is very important, and I think that added level of mental, I guess, just discussions there's sort of mental buffing you can give to these players, saying this is what you should be doing. I noticed you were doing this one thing, or like we need to switch the comp up completely. Having that pause, going and saying, let's not run Sombra anymore. Have you noticed that Sombra always does this? Let's focus on this. It's very, very important.
I think that this is. I think as we move into Overwatch League and some of that patch stuff gets normalized, and I think that once the regular league starts and the developers are keyed in on that, we're going to see, I think, you know, not so long on these patches, right? Or like being so far behind. Obviously, you're still going to be somewhat behind because you never want the competitive patch to be at the same time as the live patch going out at the same time for bug reasons and instability reasons and many, many reasons. And no developer does it that way. But I think that a lot of these issues about the meta being so dictated, I think that once everybody's in one place and there's going to be more professional infrastructure, more analysts, stats, access to stats, more coaches on teams, I think that we're going to see more diversity in terms of these compositions, and in terms of what is meta. So also, just as the game gets more heroes added to it and more maps added to it, you should see some of that diversity as well. So I think it's mostly, I think, just a phase of the game where the game is very new and not going to be something that sticks around for the ultra long term. I think we're going to see a lot different kind of strategies, at least in Overwatch League. I think right now, I understand where you're coming from, but even when watching the APAC finals, you still have the same. It's not that a team has figured out the meta. There's a certain flavor that every team has, whether it's GC.Busan running a lot of Doomfist with Hureg, that is a little bit unusual after some of the Doomfist nerfs, but them still relying on it a lot in terms of how they approach like second point on assault, to FaZe still running a lot of Genji Tracer, even though other teams have moved away from that, to Runaway running Cox on like Soldier and Reaper more heavily than other teams. So I feel like there is a lot of diversity that just isn't talked about.
I mean, Meta Athena running Zarya longer than everybody else. MY is still running that Zarya triple tank style. Some teams are running Roadhog recently, but not really the other ones. I mean, there certainly is flavor to every team. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that once Overwatch League starts and the development team is on a day-to-day basis keyed in with the professional scene, because remember, a lot of, I think the development team hasn't had this much data to look at in terms of the professional scene as what they're going to have with Overwatch League and access to all of the scrims and stuff of these teams as well. So I think that once that schedule normalizes and the dev team has all of that data for them to analyze and look at, then some of the patching will be shifting accordingly, would be my guess. And I think that these issues that's part of it. And then also the infrastructure and coaching angle and more professional ability to, like, just more professionals involved in shaping the teams, as well as, like I said, stats. Because stats are something that we haven't had perfect access to. Clearly, Winston's lab does a great job of scanning the VODs, but we still don't have things like average damage per 10 minutes of this player on Tracer, and we're going to get that stuff very soon. Stats are a huge push that Blizzard's making, and getting that API operational, but a lot of these analysts simply don't have the tools necessary to diversify their strategy. But all of that will be coming, and I think these are all things that are going to make a big impact on being less slavish to a meta.
I think having these stats as well is going to be really useful for a lot of like story building for these players. Like, in League of Legends, like when, in LCK, for example, OGN will put up like damage to champions at the end of the game, right? That's like not something we have access to.
We will
also,
fear not.
Yeah, and with the ability to do that, then you have the ability to more reliably, I think, give MVPs to not DPSs, because every Apex champions MVP has been a DPS since season 1, Taimu, all the way up to Prophet in the last one. Who Are You and Guido being the other two in seasons 2 and 3. But maybe, the stats give you, as an analyst, the argument of like, I mean, holy shit, he did twice dealing as the other support. I didn't know that. Those are the things you can't really see right now, but as you say, with the API coming, there's so many ways to make someone who you can't see in the game of 12 players all the time look really good, because you could say, oh, look at how much healing this like Ana has been able to put out compared to the other Ana, or how many sleep darts he hit this game that we didn't even see on camera, things like that.
Okay. Right, as a last topic I wanted to bring up, so we now know the Envious lineup is the Dallas Fuel. Truly shocking information. But one aspect I wanted to ask get your take on was, Seagull was brought into the lineup, and this is a team where, in theory, they already had some of the best DPS players. So what do you think of this addition to now the Dallas Fuel of Seagull?
I mean, I think it's interesting because Seagull, to me, because I didn't follow him pre-Overwatch, didn't really know much about him. I watched him just because he was streaming Overwatch on Twitch. I always consider Seagull, to me, like, as a streamer, not a pro gamer, so it feels odd that there's so much hype around like what this does for the roster. Because for me, I just see like his streaming and he's fantastic DPS, in terms of solo queue.
I believe he did try a little bit to be a pro gamer, but yeah, mainly streaming, you're right.
Yeah, so like when I look at this, I think like he's a very good player from what I've seen in solo queue, but how does he do in a real competitive team? He's an older player as well. Those are the things that like I don't know yet, but I'm excited to find out. Like, how does he do with these younger players who have traveled the world with this roster? Yeah. How does he perform, Because he just hasn't seen the things that they have, and he's an older, wise person who could add a lot to the team, I think. But mechanically, and how often they use him in the squad, like, or how often he's a sub, I feel like my impression is he won't be on the main roster most of the time. He'll be mostly a sub. Yeah. So I'm excited to see how it goes, but I'm just not sure.
Like, that's the problem I have, Monty, basically to transition that. Like, obviously we know Seagull from NRG, etc., and he's been to Apex and whatnot, but he didn't have much success competitively. Here's the thing, though. I'm with Wolf in that when I saw this, I was like, well, time to put on my old esports industry hat. Oh, I'm incredibly cynical. Well done, Hastro. You've signed someone who's got a massive name, who will definitely be a fan favorite, and maybe in the right meta will play sometimes, but probably won't be a starting player. What do you think?
I think that when we saw him in the Contenders playoffs and he played Pharah, he added an extra dimension to Envy that wasn't there before. I think he's mostly going to be a specialist player on one or two heroes that aren't covered by guys like Effect and Taimu. And I think this is a really smart sign, not only because it's going to get them a lot of fans, which is, certainly valuable and something you think about as an owner, but he is Siegel also as a player has said time and time again that his priority is not on streaming, it's on being a professional player. That's when he was on Energy. He's very good at streaming, he's a very popular streamer, but his heart, I think, has always been more in the competitive scene. So I think he will be used to play limited roles on limited maps where they were struggling before. And I think that from an objective point of view where you say, that was the complaint, right? Where is the Pharah player on this NV roster? Has it limited to them in the past? Absolutely. So when we saw him come out and play some of those control maps like we witnessed in the Contenders final, certainly it wasn't by NV standards of competition where they compete against top Korean teams. It wasn't, playing phase and rolling them wasn't that difficult. So we don't know how he's going to fit in a really difficult situation, like if they have to play against Seoul or New York or something like that. But yeah, I think as a specialist where they say, hey, Siegel, you just spend your time working on these particular heroes, and if we need you, we're going to sub you in for this map, I think he'll do a great job. I think he's a tool. He's going to be a tool with some purpose, like with XQC as well. Okay, we look at XQC. He's one of the biggest Overwatch streamers, very popular, but he's also a good tank. He's a good Winston player. And again, another complaint that people had legitimately about Envy as a roster is that they lacked a certain aggressiveness in a dive meta. And Coco's a good Reinhardt player, but he's a rather passive tank. And what happens when you add XQC is all of a sudden you dimensionalize playing a more aggressive dive style if you need it on certain maps or against certain teams. So I think that neither of these guys are going to be the starting members, as it were. Like, they should see less play time than the other DPS or tank players on the roster. But do I think that it adds an extra threat to Envy that they desperately needed, that another dimension? Sure. I think they're good pickups. I think they're very good pickups.
There's a few players in Apex that we have like this as well, like Curious on Cloud9 Kongdu plays a lot of King's Row, for example. Hanzo, things like that on that map specifically can get subbed out. Or Sashin on the NC Foxes, who actually plays very similarly, actually, what you're talking about with his Genji and his Pharah. And we all know Taimu's reluctance to play Genji is quite high. So something that, if Siegel could become a good Genji player, it could be used in situations like that, I suppose. So, yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it, not just in terms of what he can bring to the table in terms of experience and age and knowledge, maturity, things like that, but he has his own programming experience as well in Overwatch, the energy stuff you were talking about. But yeah, I think the extra flexibility it brings is a big deal.
And that's exciting to me about Overwatch as a game, is because you can sub out map to map. I think that the more professional this game gets, we're going to see players specialize more and more on specific heroes and specific strategies. Because if you can run a 12-man roster in Overwatch League, why not just have somebody practice a couple heroes 24/7 and just use them on specific maps, and you're always scrimming with one squad on other maps, and it allows people to dedicate more of their time to getting very, very good and honing their skills at one thing, and adds a lot of depth to the roster. Personally, as an analyst, I find it exciting to think about, okay, well, this team is dynamically using 10 different players. What does it mean when they put this player in on this map? And what were their other options? It's a cool point of analysis that I think is not really used very much in other esports, but the depth of roster you could have in Overwatch, I think, is one of the unique aspects of it as a competitive title.